Good morning, folks, and welcome to the 2021 Economic Forecast event. My name is Nathan Emmons, and I'm the current board chair for the Kitsap Economic Development Alliance. To kick things off, I'd like to briefly introduce our MC for today's event, KEDA's new executive director, Joe Morrison. Joe joined KEDA in October 2020 and has done a really remarkable job leading the team with a laser focus on serving our business community during COVID. Prior to joining KEDA, Joe led the municipality of Anchorage's 49th State Angel Fund, investing in Alaska startups to help build an entrepreneurial infrastructure for the state. You can read more about Joe in the bio sheet for today's event or his recent columns in the Kitsap Business Journal. And he'll share some thoughts with you this morning as we begin. With that, I'll turn it over to Joe to begin the program.
All right, thank you, Nathan, and thanks to everybody out there, Kitsap and beyond, that is joining us this morning for our first ever large digital event. We have almost 200 registered attendees. We might have a few more than that, actually. And I'm the new guy at KEDA. So just a little bit about me, having stepped into the role in October of 2020. The last 8 years of my life, as Nathan referenced, was really working to build Alaska's entrepreneurial ecosystem. I ran a $12.7 million economic development fund out of the municipality of Anchorage. And I'm an Alaska kid, and it was a really great opportunity to give back to the community where I lived. But I moved down to Port Orchard in 2017 and was looking for other things. And when this role at KEDA came open, it was really a dream opportunity to work with wonderful people, amazing professionals in a community that I really care about and have come to love. So anyway, a little bit about me, some fun facts in there, and now let's get to the point. Let's talk about what KEDA is doing, what we've been doing, and where we're going coming up. So a little bit about today to start. Our keynote is John Karras, and John is an Austin-based economic developer with TIP strategies, and he's going to be talking about some of what is the latest in our disruptive world, which is work from home, and the latest on the work from home workforce and how talent attraction can be best optimized in that environment. We're going to hear from John at 11 o'clock today. But coming up, the dynamic duo of economics. I almost want to call them the bad boys of economics, but it's just their jokes that are a little bad from time to time. We've got Hart, Hodges, and James McCafferty, our partners and valued economists from Western Washington University, who are going to be taking us through a 2021 economic forecast. And although we have this great title, they've got an even better title to share with you at 9:15. So that's coming up in just a moment. We're going to take a break today at 10:20. And by the way, a break is really a break. Please make sure you get up, stretch, walk away from your screen. We'll have a rotator video on the background that talks about some of our investors and some of the beauty that we live in Kitsap. But when we come back from break, we're going to hear from 5 professional CEOs, managers, and women leaders on how COVID has affected them. One thing about the times that we're living in is that they are affecting different parts of our communities and different parts of our economies differently. And we know that going into the pandemic, women weren't on an equal wage footing with men. They've continued to make sacrifices over the course of the last year. So we're going to explore that a little bit at 10:30. And before we go to break at 9:50, we're going to hear from Keith Grellner, who is the public health administrator of the Kitsap Public Health District. In addition, Keith is the chair of the Washington State Board of Health. So he's got direct responsibility for our community's response to this pandemic and how we stay healthy and safe in this environment. We're going to hear from Keith at 9:50, and he's going to have the latest on some of our numbers and how we're moving through phases, vaccination, that kind of thing. We'll close the day at 11:40 with Congressional Representative Derek Kilmer, who's going to give us the latest in news from Washington, D.C., federal forecast and legislation that's pending. My thanks to the Congressman for joining us today. We really look forward to that. And now let's talk a little bit about KEDA and our strategy for this year. It's a very easy strategy because the challenge we face is very clear. And the strategy is called One Kitsap. And what it really means is that we are going to focus on 3 areas. The first is to build a These are disruptive and destabilizing times, and it's important that we stick together. From Bainbridge to Bremerton and parts beyond, we are very different as a community, but what really matters is that we support each other, because there are parts of this community that are hurting very badly, and it's really important that we continue to invest in the structures, the businesses, and our neighbors for economic prosperity moving forward. So our focus for this year is really to stay focused on Kitsap, to stay focused on business retention and expansion, and to offer programs, partnerships, and technical assistance to the public and private institutions in our county to help us get through this. And one thing that happened last year that we didn't quite anticipate was we did this directly. We worked with 373 businesses last year, processing over $2.6 million of grants, working with the cities of Bremerton and Port Orchard, working with the government of Kitsap County, working with the Washington State Department of Commerce to directly run grant programs that would invest in local businesses and provide them the capital they need during a downturn. You know, since taking this role, I've talked to many of you, and there are some people in some parts of our economy that they're having their best year ever. And I know that sounds strange, but it's really true if you think about aspects of the financial industry and some manufacturers, technology. In a way, they're having the best year ever. But many parts of our economy are being absolutely hammered by this pandemic, not the least of which is restaurants, hospitality, tourism, and small retailers. So just a look at some of the hundreds of hours that we put in last year. This is just one of 5 grant programs we ran across 11 phases. And what I think is really interesting, just from this small example, again, it's probably 1/10 of our work that we did last year. Thanks to Kathy Kokas, Teresa Mangrum, and Susan Beach for their hard work. You know, we reached the entire county. We reached the unincorporated parts of the county. We reached people who worked from home and ran businesses from home. We reached people with a physical location. And literally, we had 10 times the impact. We would anticipate that more grant programs may occur in 2021. And so again, you know, our work is really clear. It's to ensure that our community has the resources, partnerships, the programs, the ability to come together, technical assistance, direct work with businesses to weather this storm. We're not out of this by a long shot. There are hopeful signs ahead, but it's been a long year, and some of these challenges are going to continue in our community. KEDA is going to be working on the front lines of economic development and response in Kitsap County, remaining very Kitsap focused to add value to our community. Anything we do, we're going to do with a lens involving diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that means any work, if we're working to provide resources to Kitsap County, we're going to do it in a DEI focused way. If we're working in entrepreneurship and innovation, something coming up this year, we're going to do it in a fashion that really thinks about, you know, how can we value the diversity in our community? How can we welcome it inclusively into our work? And how can we advocate for equity of opportunity? We know that a lot of work in the past and the status quo of a lot of our society hasn't historically been inclusive and offered economic opportunity to everyone. We're going to take a holistic view at KEDA, no matter what it is we do, to work with an inclusive lens and a holistic view long-term to reach the entire Kitsap community. I want to thank Nathan and the rest of our executive committee. I want to thank our entire board and the scores of investors that are involved in KEDA for their strong support since I came on board, and their continued dedication to this amazing community that it is we all call home. You know, since moving down here in 2017, I've kind of wondered, why doesn't everybody live here? It's amazing, it's beautiful, and it's filled with special people who are kind, wonderful, and who support each other. So moving forward, our brand is One Kitsap for this year. It's one strategy, and we're going to work very hard to continue to provide resources to our community. Now I'd like to turn things over to one of our legacy investors who was also kind enough to sponsor this event as our premier event sponsor. Please welcome and thank you very much, Sean Gilfetter from Kitsap Credit Union. Sean?
Great, thanks, Joe, and thanks for doing such a fine job in leading KEDA through these uncertain times. Just like to say to folks today, it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you this morning, and like to welcome all of you on behalf of Kitsap Credit Union's Board of Directors, our staff, and the 116,000 member owners of Kitsap Credit Union as your primary sponsor. If we can there we go. I'm back on video. Great.
There we go.
Just a little bit about Kitsap Credit Union. We believe in empowering life's opportunities, and we're deeply committed to our members' financial well-being and prosperity and quality of life in the communities that we serve. And as Joe has mentioned, I too am new to this community past 2 years, and just love being here and being part of what makes the Pacific Northwest so special. This year, though, we know has not been normal. My family has spent more time in isolation than they have enjoying the Pacific Northwest, but we know that COVID is not forever. And Kitsap Credit Union's commitment here is to serve our community. We recognize that communities are based on strong local businesses at its core and a strong financial institution. And as the pandemic began to exhaust financial resources of many of our local business owners, we knew we had to help. We quickly implemented programs and processes needed to facilitate the new SBA PPP program. During our first round, we were able to provide over 200 local businesses with assistance. We also modified almost $115 million worth of our loan portfolio as part of a process within the first 3 weeks of the pandemic. So we're really here to help our communities. Our efforts saved over 1,300 local jobs, and we're proud of that. In this next round of assistance coming from the SBA, we've already saved over 300 local jobs by providing financial assistance to those businesses. Our dedication to local businesses also fuels our support for organizations like the Kitsap Economic Development Alliance. And at this time, I'd just like to give a shout out to Joe, Kathy, Teresa, and the rest of the team there for dealing with this pandemic and all the adversity that we've seen, and keeping the faith and believing the community, and believing that keeping economic development alive here within this community is critically important to our future. They've done an exceptional job, as has the Board of Directors of KEDA, in helping local businesses during these unprecedented times. And I'm confident you're here today as a participant on this call to learn a little bit more about what makes the quality of life here so special and why we enjoy the Pacific Northwest so much. I thank you all for your devotion to your efforts and your support of KEDA. In closing here, my opening comments, just like to leave you with the relevant words from Helen Keller. Alone we can do little, together we can do so much. It's my great pleasure to introduce our first guest speakers, two guest speakers, James McCafferty and Hart Hodges, co-directors of Western Washington Center for Economic Business Research. They're ready to help us understand what's happening in our economic environments and leading us through to this post-COVID world that we're about to endeavor on this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Hart, Dave, we got a pretty big buildup here. I hope your presentation's good. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, well, thanks so much. I want to also say thanks to Sean and Joe, Nathan, Teresa, everybody else for putting this together and for being willing to have us back. So I'm going to just jump in. We welcome questions along the way. So the living contagiously, I don't know where to start. I think you're never supposed to start a talk with an apology, but end of last January, a little over a year ago, one of the questions from the audience was, should we be worried about this new virus that we're reading about in China? And James and I said, it's a risk, but surely they're going to contain this like they did SARS and others. So with egg on our face, here we go.
But no bacon, evidently. There's no bacon today.
So, we're going to try to start at the national level. When does GDP return to sort of a more normal level? What about employment and unemployment? Then we're going to drill down to the Puget Sound level and a little bit about Kitsap. And then if we have time, something on what are the major trends, because now you're reading that people are moving to Zoom lands and they're leaving cities. And we'll set the stage for some of the talks later this morning. So in this picture of GDP, you can see the sharp drop that started last March and into April, and then the remarkably fast recovery. And the twist on that story is remarkably fast part of the way back, certainly not all the way back. The best expectations, and we're getting this from our own modeling, but also you get it from Congressional Budget Office or Blue Chip Consensus Forecast or other forecasting outlets, GDP getting back to pre-pandemic levels probably by Q3 this year, so late summer, early fall. We'll let Keith in just a little bit talk more about the health issues, but it's certainly, our forecast hinges very, very much on how people behave. So this particular graphic shows infections and testings. It's the University of Washington's model. And the opportunity for a continued decline in infections is available to us if we mask up, keep doing the right things. Much more negative alternatives are also available to us if we don't behave. And so there's a possibility of a fourth wave, especially with some of the other newer variants of COVID. So we'll get to that. It matters to us on the economic front, not just the public health front, because how mobile we can be dictates a lot of what can happen economically speaking, right? If there's a fourth wave and we have to go back into some tighter phase, that is just horrible for a lot of small businesses. You need the foot traffic, you need the activity. There's a lot of businesses, especially when you think about leisure and hospitality and food service, gyms, et cetera. Those things don't happen online. I can't order my exercise routine from Amazon. And believe me, I'm looking, I'm trying. So one of the groups that we work with, Kilmer & Associates, has what we think is a good model on when do vaccines get us to a point where we can think really casually about going out to eat or doing something else. Fall is the most likely scenario. We'd love to tell you summer, that the economy is going to be back in full swing with people out on the sidewalks. We don't think so. So
that optimistic there would depend on doubling the amount of vaccinations we're doing on a daily basis to get there. So that's why it's considered really optimistic and unlikely, because we are expecting to see some supply chain interruptions and other things happen. Probably some natural things like happening in Texas right now, and things just from natural production processes. So that November timeline seems really realistic.
We know how to give an uplifting forecast, don't we, James?
We do. We know we can bring in a real crowd on their feet.
So drilling down a little bit more specifically on gross domestic product, and I know that's everybody's favorite topic, but one thing we want to show that the numbers in the table we have here are annualized. We almost always report GDP numbers on an annualized basis. So in the second quarter of 2020, that April, May, June period, the economy did not fall by 30%. If what we had seen happening in that period, if it had happened for a year, that's a 32% decline in economic activity. One of the sharpest, or if not the sharpest on record, to fall that much, that fast. And then the sharpest recovery to go up that much, that fast the following quarter. But please remember that 30% down is not exactly offset by 30% up, right? If you start with $100 and you lose 50%, and then you make 50% back, you're not back to 100.
Oh wait, that's only 75.
Yeah. So
Now, Hart, I keep hearing letters. It's like Sesame Street sometimes with economics, but letter V, is this a V-shaped recovery? Should I be thinking that?
well, both Sean and Joe mentioned the unevenness of this recovery and the impacts of the pandemic. It's a super V for some people. It's a swoosh for others. It's an L for others still. So, you're seeing people talk about a K, where you got a sharp upward angle for parts of the economy and still going down for some. You can pick your letter or shape. One thing to keep in mind, and we'll come back to that in a moment, is the unevenness of how people are experiencing this recovery in the economy in general. So one of the things that we have to ask, because we still do not have perfect data and all the information from last quarter, we're assuming it's going to come in at about 5%, 4.5 to 5%. And we look ahead to the current quarter. One of the things that we're going to talk about is the estimates of GDP growth in the first quarter. So right now, yes, we have to forecast the recent past and the present, but those forecasts have been slowly trending down the longer we wait for another stimulus package, or the longer this current wave of the pandemic lingers, the lower that output.
We should remind people GDP is a national number when we're talking about it here.
Yeah, and I've got some reminders. Not only is it a national number, it's an overall broad metric, and we've already mentioned that different people are experiencing this such different ways. It's important to have that reference point, the GDP reference point. It's also important to remember that what we say about GDP is not very telling for different groups. Unemployment sort of highlights that, and especially for women, people dropping out of the labor force, maybe to stay home with kids who are in school online, and somebody's got to be home with them. The way we calculate unemployment, and I just did a little quick math. If some people are dropping out and they're no longer looking for work, they're not considered unemployed and they're not considered part of the labor force. And that makes unemployment look a little bit better than it probably is. So we start with GDP, unemployment. It's really important to remember that that's the beginning of a conversation, not the end. It doesn't tell you everything you want to know.
Hart, can I go back? I want to visually, you can go back or not, but when we think about all the stimulus and we think about the printing presses running by the Fed, should be any kind of concerns about structural, financial, or economic bubbles from any of that?
Can I put that on hold and come back? And
yes.
Yep. The answer is yes, but let's come back to that. So looking ahead, you see a surge with the reopening in GDP for this year. Inflation, no one is calling for inflation. No one at the Fed, no one in the various forecasting houses. James, you and I are a little bit more worried about inflation than these numbers suggest.
We worry. And GDP, we should say the early numbers we're seeing on GDP, they keep dropping the estimates for Q1. Now stimulus may change that depending on how fast they get it out, et cetera. Retail numbers just came out for January, which looked really good.
I think I've got a slide that'll help you with this. So
okay,
there you go. Talk about it.
Rapidly changing. So yeah, so things keep shifting, and so you're seeing here how real GDP has changed from the different forecasts. And so this stuff is moving much at a much higher rate than we normally see these estimates move. And so it's we get weekly updates from one of the Feds on their estimates for GDP. We also see a monthly forecast by a group of economists on GDP. And so we're constantly watching these numbers as they move around, and they're being moved because there's so many other things going on in the economy around retail spending, around stimulus programs, infection rates, mobility rates. a lot of things are moving much faster than they would normally. So we're seeing this stuff move at a pace most of us are very uncomfortable with, because it makes us go back and redo our work a lot.
Yeah, especially when you realize how policy driven the economy is right now, with what the Fed does, or how big the next stimulus package will be. But you'll notice we keep revising up our forecast for how bad the pandemic hit us. Not as badly overall as some originally thought, but we also keep revising down what we think is going to happen in 2021. So it's a moving target for sure. In addition to that, we have some very clear challenges or headwinds, if you will. Supply chain disruptions. You've probably all read about chip shortages that are making GM and some others close car manufacturing lines. So the economy could go up strikingly and sharply with a large stimulus. The longer the stimulus is delayed, so on and so forth, right? You got this, I don't know, Dr. Doolittle's push me, pull you going on in the economy, which makes it hard. We mentioned the fourth wave. Inflation is a risk that most people say is a very, very small risk. A reminder here, that this recession is really, really different. So bear with me and I'll explain. The blue line is essentially employment in the manufacturing sector, goods producing. And you can see all of the dips in the blue are recessions. You see the 2009 big dip, the 2001 recession, and going back. And notice the blue always falls well below the pink, which is employment in the services providing sectors.
But not this time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, historically, we've talked about recessions hitting manufacturing because people are holding off on buying that car, that dishwasher, whatever, and it hits men or jobs that are traditionally dominated by men. And then you look at the far right of the graph and the extreme hit to services, and a lot of industry sectors dominated by women and communities of color. So very, very different recession, very, very different people getting hit.
Let's throw in here for just a second, because it's different, but there's also a lot of things that have been brought to the light that were happening that people really weren't aware of. So for example, building materials, people have really noticed in this recession how building materials are in short supply, they're expensive, lead times have pushed up. That was happening before this. And it was precipitated by several different things. We actually wrote an article about it about a year and a half, 2 years ago, on why building materials were shifting. And that's happening in all the different industries. They all had things happening. And I think the phrase is recession's a terrible thing to waste. And so all this stuff gets sped up.
Accelerated or magnified. Yeah, absolutely. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this slide. It's just showing jobless claims, showing how the recovery has largely stalled on the labor side. And so this is employment, total non-farm employment US, still a national picture. Fred, by the way, in that upper left corner is the Federal Reserve economic data. And you see the amazing drop off in employment when the economy closed last March, and then the recovery. And we had a strong V in our picture for GDP, and not nearly so much with employment. People cannot go back to their food service job. They can't go back to their job at a hotel. Your favorite flight attendant is still furloughed, and so on and so forth. So it's a nagging troubles with the labor market.
Headline yesterday said millions of jobs won't come back.
Well, that you said a recession is a terrible thing to waste. A lot of times coming out of a recession, it's a good time to implement new technologies or new strategies. And sometimes those are very disruptive to the labor force. So this shows the unemployment rate spiking to 15%, somewhat artificially, because a lot of people felt like, okay, yeah, I'm unemployed, I'm collecting unemployment, but I'm going to go back to my job. This is temporary. Some of that was true, and then you can see this sort of now stubborn unemployment at between 6 and 7%. And the question is, when does it get back down to 4 to 5%?
Well, if you have 30% of the people not going out and about like normal, this makes sense.
That
right?
mobility graph that we were showing, yes. And it varies by place. So this was a graphic, and I'll back up. Most of the data that we have to deal with and work with can be delayed for months or even a quarter. The official personal consumption expenditure data, we don't see it until the Bureau of Labor Statistics and other departments have compiled the data, made it sure it all matches from different perspectives and different angles. And so we get it months and months late. And that doesn't help us in this pandemic. So this is a graphic that is showing what we think is happening with, this is employment, but it's based on credit card data, iPhone or smartphone GPS tracking data, credit card spending, so on. And what we're finding is people in higher wage jobs, yeah, there was a dip, but almost immediately back to pre-pandemic levels. And actually there's been hiring. You look at companies like Amazon or Zoom or even Microsoft to an extent, right? The demand is up for their products and services. They've had to hire. Meanwhile, lower wage workers were back to leisure and hospitality, food service, in-home healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. Those jobs haven't really come back much at all.
And what's interesting with this data set is the wage brackets, of course, right? National data, $60,000 in Alabama is worth a lot more than in King County. But even when you look at specific data for a region in these same buckets, we see the same kind of trends.
And I think we're going to have to hurry up here. You asked about asset bubbles, James. One of the things that struck us and doing our forecast last summer was really challenging because there was so much money pumped into the economy so fast. It was actually a record increase in income in 2020. So yes, we had this pandemic. Yes, spending stopped, but income on an aggregate basis went up really sharply. And when you think about what happens if income is going up and I'm not going out to eat, I'm not getting on a plane, I'm not whatever, right? Where does that money go? So that money went into the stock market. That money has been going into housing, while housing has been, the supplies have been at historic lows. So people have been thinking, gosh, the housing market is off its rocker. It's lost its mind. Why is housing doing so well in the midst of a pandemic? Well, partly it's the money was there, and partly, remember, if employment and income is up for people at higher income levels, that's your home buying market. It's fine, thank you. The lower income market is much more of a rental market. So you have to think very clearly when you say housing, ownership versus rental, two very different worlds. I'll say really quickly, and skip the slide. Money is finding a home in stock market. We'll skip with the GameStop jokes and memes and everything. But just know that, yeah, a lot of money, and James, you were asking this, a lot of money getting pushed into the economy, and maybe more coming soon. It is finding a home. We're not seeing inflation on the consumer prices yet. We are seeing asset price inflation. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Washington. So our friends at the Economic Revenue Forecast Council have an employment forecast. And we said, maybe the labor market gets back to pre-pandemic levels in early 2022. So that's probably about right. But if you think about the labor market needing to keep growing, to keep up with population growth, we don't get back up to where we would have been for years and years, right? So there's a real output gap, and there's a cost to this that lingers past 2022.
And if people do decide to exit the workforce more permanently, that affects how many jobs are needed. Yeah. So this is not a simple straight line equation. There's a lot to take into account.
Absolutely. We published the Puget Sound Economic Forecaster. We have our forecast for the Snohomish, King, Pierce, and Kitsap region. When we say massaging the model, we're having to guess, or actually, we're doing different scenarios with our model. Because if you think there's going to be a $1.9 trillion stimulus next month, you better put that into your forecast. So we have to run a forecast without it. We have to put a forecast with it. We have to put a forecast together that says maybe there's a compromise closer to 1 trillion. And that's been very, very difficult on the forecast side. Mostly what we're seeing is a little bit bigger hit on the employment side when we built our last forecast in the Puget Sound region than nationally. That's a little bit misleading. It's because we're coming off of something bigger. I mean, the real takeaway is we're expecting something quite similar in our region than the US overall. There is a wild card here where you see our forecast being a little bit more pessimistic than the US. One reason is aerospace. You can see here is the forecast that the folks in Olympia put together, and you look at what they were expecting last February, almost a year ago, when we knew Boeing was having trouble with the 737 MAX. But then from this time last year through the summer, through fall, Boeing kept saying, oh, this with the 787 construction going to Charleston, or this with some other. And that alone hits our employment numbers in the Puget Sound region.
The important thing on this slide is to realize that Boeing has had a decreasing amount of employees in our region for years.
Yes.
And as a percentage of total employment in the region has become very, very small as comparison to where they used to be. So the impacts of Boeing will definitely be felt, but it's going to be much more localized than it would have been, say, 20 years ago.
Okay, thinking about Kitsap, and we're going to have to keep speeding up. I just wanted to put a little bit of data here, especially when we start talking later in this program about work from home, because some jobs, and I'm going to say some industry sectors, some collections of jobs allow work from home or some type of hybrid work much more easily than others. So it's important to ask, what kind of job mix do we have? So I picked King sort of out of convenience, and it's also next door. So the blue is the percentage of employment in Kitsap, red is percentage of employment in King. I also wanted to point out, and by the way, the government numbers off on the far right. For Kitsap, that's government net of federal. So we're not swamping you with a lot of military. You see the accommodation and food service a little bit higher in Kitsap. I want to call your attention to the information and professional technical service categories. And
the question here is, Hart, define the difference between info and professional and technical.
I actually usually try to just go ahead and think of them together, but professional and technical services can include a number of different consulting type businesses. Information is, think software. That's cheating, but software publishing, software engineering, and I'll say that because information, and we've got this on 2 slides. If you look at the average wage for software publishing, software engineering in King County, $224,000 a year.
Makes those houses affordable.
Wow, we could go off on a lot of stories about affordable housing or affordable this or that, right? So this is a percentage of wage. I've switched from percentage of employment to percentage of income. And retail is big in King County because a lot of Amazon jobs are classified in retail. So you just see a particular job mix that has been incredibly powerful for King County for a decade and might become very powerful for Kitsap.
Wait, Hart, go back. You missed the key point, I think, on the slide. What's that $88,000 there?
Well, that's your income in that sector if you're in Kitsap County.
Oh, so if I work in King County, I get $200K, and if I work in Kitsap County, I get 88.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just for the audience's amusement, if I lived in Whatcom County, what would I get?
Oh, I get close to 70.
Ding, ding, chicken dinner. All right, next slide.
A different set of employment data, just trying to look at what's been happening in Kitsap. So January for March, You know, you lost almost 3,000 leisure and hospitality jobs. You've only gained back 1,000. But look what's happened in retail. More than bounced back. Not surprising, right? In part because people are supporting local stores, and in part because of how some online sales are counted.
And we have seen that nationally, that local retailers have done much, much better than the online retailers, in fact, from a growth rate, as long as they've adopted some of those strategies.
Professional business services doing well. Construction, keep an eye on that. Lots of counties not seeing that recovery in construction, in part because not that many people to pull into construction right now, given what's going on elsewhere. Here's spending, consumer spending in Kitsap County up, right? You see the drop as of earlier this month, up above pre-pandemic levels. That's reflected in your strong retail employment growth and good professional and business services category as well.
It's also showing us people are just changing how they're spending their money. You know, they're not going on trips, they're going shopping.
Small businesses still struggling. Kitsap looks a lot like the rest of the region in terms of the hit to small businesses. All right, James, I'll take this slide. I want you to take the next one. We'll do this really quickly. For the last decade plus, the story on economic development, that regional economics, really, not just economic development, because that's too big of a category, but has been one of the superstar cities. And you don't have to read the letters and words on the graph. Just look at where the yellowish sort of cities are, because that's almost 40% of the job growth coming out of the 2009 recession to 2017. It was a strong city story. And I mean, publishing industries except internet, that's in that information category. And for the whole year, the last numbers I put up were just for the most recent quarter, but for the whole year, 258,000 in Seattle compared to 133 nationally. You know, people want to be where they can be productive, that co-location of employees, the agglomeration and knowledge spillovers, lots going on in cities. And James, does that change? What's the new narrative?
It could really change, because the ability to work remote or a hybrid, it's going to vary a lot by industry. There's a story in the Seattle Times today about different places that are paying premiums to get people to move. So if you'd like to move to certain cities and states, they'll pay you like $15,000 just to move, which is crazy to do that. But people are going to continue to look for these opportunities where they can do this. So the problem is we don't know what this means long term, because companies could do this for a while, but then not maintain it, or could decide. That pendulum kind of swings back and forth. And so we've gone to an extreme. So we're likely to push back the next way. And the big question we have is, a lot of people moved up there in their careers because of networking. And just because you can do your current job from home in the middle of Topeka, can you do your next job the same way? And that's going to be the big question on how this actually works.
So we thought it was also very interesting that people are leaving New York, and people saying, see, that's the death of cities. But the number one destination for people leaving New York was Seattle. And Seattle also is one of the top destinations for people leaving San Francisco. So yes, San Francisco and New York are seeing some it's changing. They're seeing some inflows now. But that was, like James said, that was happening before the pandemic, right? Because those cities had gotten so expensive. So we think cities are continuing to be attractive. Millennials are getting into their home buying years, their household formation years. They may be looking for places like a Boise, where they feel like they have more space or more room to raise a family. We don't think the cities are just in dire straits, but we've got a speaker on that coming up just a little bit in the program. So trying to stay responsive to the schedule. GDP back later this year, early fall. Unemployment next year at the earliest. But again, it's whether you were talking about getting back to where we were at this point last year, or whether you want to get where we should be. Right. So that's 2022, or you're going to be talking 2024 or longer. Kitsap has had a pretty good recovery, certainly not complete, certainly not in all industry sectors. But being at that place where you can commute a couple of days into the city, but have that quality of life. Joe, you mentioned it. Why doesn't everybody live here? These trends that we're seeing of being, can I be close to a big city so I can commute in sometimes? This could all play out really well for Kitsap. So, our forecast for the region is the region's going to look a good bit like the U.S. overall. We have Amazon, we have Microsoft, we have other drivers, but we also have Boeing and some other things that are going to lag a bit. Kitsap may do quite well. And I think.
All right, so Hart, you put up the next slide, and I'll do my quick commercial that says, hey, if you want some more of this great stuff, we've got great stuff on social media every day. We post a ton of articles every day. So if you're looking for good clearinghouse for information, follow us on social media. We talked about the Puget Sound Economic Forecaster, and you can find that at economicforecaster.com. You can also find our podcast. Somebody said we should start a podcast, and my comment was, wish granted. Here you go. We do a podcast at least once per quarter, but then as stuff happens, we do that as well. And of course, we love people sending us emails, and we do research for folks, so we can contact us that as well. So I've got a couple of questions here for you, Hart. The first one you're going to love because it's one of your favorite questions. If you had to pick a favorite index or an indice to kind of watch what's going on in the economy, what would you pick?
That's not fair.
I know. That's why you get the question and I get to ask them.
My favorite index hasn't been invented yet, so I'm gonna just punt and say I'll start with GDP, but I will know it's just full of weaknesses and faults. But I'll start there. So.
I tend to watch the consumer side of things. So I'm looking at consumer confidence. I look at consumer spending patterns. I look, and then of course it kind of goes quickly from there. So I tend to look at the consumer side more, just because.
Notice that neither one of us mentioned the S&P 500 or something, because the stock market's off on its own
little
journey
world
at the moment. All
right. So the next question is, what's with the health sector wages being higher in Kitsap than King? You got any insight there?
It's simple job mix, right? We often think about the health sector as being doctors and nurses and high paying, but you've got to remember that all of the home health workers, which are borderline minimum wage, and all of the orderly, and I mean, there's all sorts of people that are cleaning in hospitals. And so King County has a higher percentage of lower paid workers in all of the bigger hospitals. They have a lot of home health in like South King County. So that lower end of the healthcare spectrum, if you will, is sadly more represented in King County than you see it in Kitsap.
All right. So we know the Fed, et cetera, doesn't think inflation is going to be a big concern. We said the same thing. We don't see inflation being a big concern. Do you want to say why you don't think it's a big concern?
The main story there is that all the money depends on where the money ends, right? And the Econ 101 comment of inflation occurs when you have too much money chasing too few goods, or you need wage push inflation. So if you're not seeing wage pressure, and we're not given the current unemployment, and if you're not seeing money in consumers' hands being spent, and we aren't. We've been seeing money go into bank reserves. We've been seeing money go into the stock market. We've been seeing money going into housing. So that relationship between money supply and inflation is not just direct. It depends on the velocity of money, how money is being spent. So until we see money, more loan transactions, more spending, more consumer activity. So you're back to your consumer indices, James. Then we're not expecting much inflation.
All right. I think it's going to be our last question before they get our hook out here. But when we said the good things are Kitsap are coming, it's what are you talking about? More people moving, or is there something else? What's the good things that are coming?
Well, I think some of where you shop, right, continues post-pandemic. You've learned I can do this online, I can do this locally. I guess what I really meant by good things, the number of people either that already in Kitsap that commute in regularly. What if they're commuting in half as frequently now, and are in the community supporting local restaurants and other businesses more frequently, more days? Or what happens if a few more people move to Kitsap? And I don't want you to have an influx that overruns the place, but you are hearing people talk about, wait, I could keep my job in Seattle, but I only have to be in my desk 2 days a week. What does that mean for a Bremerton or a Bellingham? Because the commute math is now very, very different. We should
There's the hook.
Let the next speaker talk about that as well, right? So.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm the gong these days. Hart, James, amazing work, amazing depth of research, and to all our attendees, we're going to get this information online. Yep. So you're going to be able to have a full view of the presentation, the Q&A, the video, everything. Hart, James, thank you. We value our relationship with you, Western, and the center so much. Thank you so much for giving us this insight into what's happening in the economy.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Hart. And so we're gonna go to really somebody who has deep knowledge of what's driving these economic changes, and that's Keith Grellner. He is the administrator for the Kitsap Public Health District. He has an over 30-year career at the Kitsap Public Health District, and what a time to also be the chair of the Washington State Board of Health. So, without further ado, let's hear from Keith Grellner and get the insights on the pandemic itself. Keith.
All right, good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me this morning. I really enjoyed that first talk. It was very interesting. What I'm going to do for you today is, hopefully the right screen is up there sharing. I'm going to give you a really high overview of what's going on COVID-wise in Kitsap at the moment, how we compare with the state, what is going on with vaccines, and then talk a little bit about the road to recovery, the governor's plan for everybody getting back and crawling out of the pandemic, and what that meant for Kitsap. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. And first, can I confirm that my screen is sharing properly? You guys see the PowerPoint?
We've got you. And if somebody wants to post in the chat that's an attendee, please confirm as well. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you. All right, so first I'm going to talk about our COVID-19 case summary. So this was as of yesterday. We're running right now, actually today we're back up to about 111 cases per 100,000 over the last 14 days. That metric of the rate per 100,000 over the last 14 days has kind of become the gold standard for how we're tracking COVID disease activity, not only in the county, but statewide and nationwide. So again, we're doing better than we have for a while, but we are still not doing really well as a county. As you can see, and this has been a real bugaboo for a lot of people, we still do not have the percent positive posted. We hope to get this posted by tomorrow. Since November, the state, the database that we all operate off of, which is a state database where we track disease activity and test results, it's a really old database that has been on the docket to get replaced for years. The state has not been able to get the funds to replace it. And what happened is around Thanksgiving, we had such high case loads statewide that their system crashed. And we haven't been able to calculate the percent positive since right before Thanksgiving. But the state has told us that hopefully by tomorrow, they'll get that data up and posted, and we'll start posting this percent positive again. Off to the right here is the number of vaccine doses we've given in Kitsap. And again, I'm not going to dwell on that yet, but I will talk about that in the middle of my presentation. And then lastly, the the bar chart that you see down here at the bottom, this is reflective of that case rate per 100,000 over the last 14 days. So every one of these bars represents the average of the last 14 days. And one of the things I want to point out that gets us, public health, a little nervous when we start to reopen up, and we are extremely supportive of reopening up, but every time we've had a holiday or reasons for people to get together, we have seen some pretty big spikes. And while we're concerned about it and it shouldn't stop us, it does show that, collectively, all of us as individuals, if we want to get back our economy, get out of this dark place that we've been in for about the last year, we all have to stay strong. We have to help each other, and we all have to protect each other, because every time we let our guard down, and again, there's examples here, 4th of July, we have Labor Day, which ended up running here. Then we ran into Veterans Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and we've had all these spikes, and we just need our community to stay strong, understand that wearing a mask is not a political statement. It's a way to keep yourself and others safe. And if we could keep doing those things, we can keep driving this case rate down, which is going to open up our economy and keep all of us more safe against COVID. So this is just another graph off of our COVID main page. And this isn't showing the average of the last 14 days. This is showing the actual cases on the date of their lab confirmation. And again, we see the same things. We see those, because again, there's people will get sick and gather at one time, and they may start to feel symptomatic. Some people will get tested right away. Other people will wait because the symptoms of COVID are just like the flu and other illnesses, colds, and they'll think it's something else. Oh, it can't be COVID. It must be something else. And they wait several days. They continue to go to work or continue to go and meet other people while they have these symptoms. And then they find out later that, oh, they're not getting better. I better get tested. They get tested. Then they find out they had COVID. And then as we do our case investigation, we have to go back and track all those people that were close contacts. And again, a lot of those close contacts end up becoming positives because COVID is an extremely infectious disease that we don't have what we call herd immunity to yet. And that's why the vaccines are so important as we go forward. So this is another graph off of our main COVID page. And the main thing I want to show you here is the difference or the disparities in disease rates across our different geographic locations in Kitsap. And these are generally our school districts. And what COVID has laid bare for all of us is something that public health has known for decades, that economic health, or how much people make individually and where they live, has a direct impact on the chance for people to become ill or have chronic diseases and other illnesses, which decrease the quality of life, decrease the life expectancy. And Kitsap is a perfect microcosm of those health disparities based on economy and economics. You can work, and I think most of you know this, but working your way from South Kitsap through Bremerton, Central Kitsap up to north into Bainbridge, as you do that clockwise loop, you start off with lower economic advantages in the south. They gradually improve as you move north. And again, we're seeing that with COVID. You can see, the amount of cases that Bainbridge has had compared to the number of cases South, Central, and Bremerton have had, which are representative by these darker colors, it's night and day. And what I'm going to show you in a minute also is how vaccine distribution and how different communities are set up and what their makeup is economically. We're also seeing the same thing with vaccine distribution. The last thing I'll point out on this slide real quick is that right now, this is our lowest cases in isolation that we've seen since the beginning of November. We were well up over 200 here for a while. Our close contacts in quarantine. Even though cases have come down, we still have quite a few people in quarantine, again, because when people let their guard down or they don't understand that those cold-like symptoms could be COVID, they share COVID with others, and then we end up with lots of people in quarantine. This graph briefly, this is the percent of COVID cases per age group or decade of age in Kitsap County. And you'll see this graph in a few slides from now, but I just want to show you how, as you would expect, the people who will tend to get together more, or the people who figure they're not going to get sick or not get as sick, that's where most of our disease activity occurs. Or people who have to go to work and they don't have the option to work from home. That's another big reason for this middle, these decades from 20 to 60 have the higher disease rates than the other age groups that we've seen. The 0 to 9 and the 10 to 19 are also low because, as you know, we've been mostly closed for school for quite a long time. Although Kitsap is doing pretty good with reopening schools, we're being really careful, and the private and public schools have done a really good job. And hopefully we'll keep these rates low, even though we're getting our kids back into school. This graph is a good, it just shows that among all age groups since late December or early January, I should say, we are seeing declines in cases among all those age groups, which is really good to see. And we're just keeping our fingers crossed that opening up to phase 2 will not drive that up. And I got to say that, again, we are a little worried. I mean, I drive past a couple bars on my way home every day, and they are packed. And it just worries me that people may and could let their guard down a little bit more than they should be. And we're going to see over the next couple of weeks what that means for our case rates. This graph briefly shows comparisons between the percent of our total Kitsap population, which is the second graph or the second bar on each of these graphs, which is the light green bar is the non-Hispanic white. The light blue bar is the Hispanic Latino, and the kind of the gold, or not yet, the darker yellow bar is non-Hispanic, non-white. The first bar in each of those groups is the percentage of COVID cases per that racial ethnic group. And as we can see, and I'm sure some of you have heard this, you know, for non-Hispanic whites, our case rate is far below the percentage of our population. For non-Hispanic non-whites, we see, although it gets a little closer, we're seeing the same thing, that the number of cases versus the total population is less. But we are seeing, and this is a phenomenon that we're seeing across the country, is that especially with Hispanics and Latinos, the case rate is overrepresented versus the percentage of the population. So as we talk about case rates, the other big reason, or the other big thing that gets us worried about the case rates is our hospital capacity to handle people who get severely ill. And these two graphs, the upper one represents the number of COVID-19 patients being admitted to the hospital, and the lower one is in ICU, and the lower one is the percentage of the ICU occupied by people with COVID. And as we can see in this lower graph, we really came out of a dangerous period here where, you know, over 40% of our ICU was full of ICU patients, or full of COVID patients. And again, why this concerns us is when our ICUs and our hospitals fill up with COVID patients, it means other people with other health issues have difficulty being seen. Elective surgeries and procedures get cut off, and it affects the overall health of our community. This graph, again, just really demonstrates by this yellow and red line the percent of ICU hospital beds occupied by COVID-related patients. And as you can see, we have been either in the area of concern or significant concern since way back in October. And this is something we watch very carefully. It's not something that is easy to get to, but we do have it on our website. But it is reason for concern. And again, it's not that people with COVID can't get care. It means that as more people with COVID, again, go into the hospital, it decreases the availability for people with non-COVID issues or other people with COVID to seek care. And then what that does is it makes the impacts of COVID higher in our community, and it increases the odds of death. And that concerns us, because as public health, we're trying to keep people from dying of unnatural causes. This next graph is, again, why the death rate from COVID is a big concern, even though most people do not die from COVID. So what this upper chart shows is that the majority of people in Kitsap who have died of COVID are in our 60 to over 80 group. I mean, that is the biggest group. They're not all in long-term care facilities. Many of these people were at home. They may or may not have had other complicating factors, but the fact that COVID hits this largest age group our older age group more is, again, reason to be concerned, because these folks get more ill and end up going to our ICU. And the other thing I wanted to point out, this is that chart I showed you earlier with the percentage of COVID cases per age group. And as you could see, even though our older people in our community have a higher risk of dying, they actually carry the lower risk of getting the disease. So they have a lower chance of getting it and carrying it, but they have a higher chance of dying if they get it. And where are they getting it? They're getting it from these age groups that, again, have a higher rate of disease activity, and they may or may not, be able to work from home. They may or may not be wearing their mask or being safe. And this is why, even though these lower age groups do not have as high of a likelihood of getting extremely ill or dying, they are the ones who are passing it to the older people. And that's, again, we can't just look at ourselves. We got to look at the people around us when we're trying to protect everybody from COVID. So I'm going to briefly now show you just how Kitsap compares with the state. And what this shows you is that Kitsap, we're in the upper third of cases by county, but we're in the lower portion of the upper third is what I'm trying to show here. The darker the color, the higher the case rates in the counties. And again, Kitsap, we're just above the lower third line for the entire county. So case-wise, compared to the rest of the state, we're actually doing okay. And that's a good reflection on what our community is trying to do to keep each other safe. The upper chart here, and the dark blue trend line, those are the 7-day average of cases in Washington state as a whole. The bottom bar chart, the green chart, those are the 7-day average of cases just in Kitsap. And what I'm showing you here is, even though the rate or the number is much lower for Kitsap, the trend line essentially is the same. The state, we have seen the same bumps in cases that the state has seen. So we're pretty similar to what's going on elsewhere in the state and elsewhere in the nation. So I want to move into vaccines now. So we are in phase 1B, tier 1 of the state's vaccine program. We started this phase the second week of January, and the way vaccine is trickling out at a really, really slow rate, we are probably going to be in this phase at least through the end of March. And I wish I had better news for that, but there's just not enough vaccine available. Many of you may recall in late December and early January, the health district was just begging our providers to sign on to give vaccine, because under the federal and the state plan, they originally had most of the vaccine going through our regular normal healthcare system and vaccine providers to give the COVID vaccine. And that did not work out real well. And it's still part of the plan, but they have reverted back to plans that we've had in the past now, where state and local public health are also getting involved with giving vaccines. We are involved now. We have opened up one of our own clinics. Now the problem in Kitsap is we have plenty of providers, but there's just not enough vaccine coming to the state or to Kitsap to keep all of our providers going. Again, this slide just again really summarizes where we are in phase 1A, phase 1B, tier 1. And it's mostly our most at-risk healthcare workers, long-term care residents and workers, people over 65, and people 50 years and older that live in multi-generational households.
Keith?
And again, under past situations, our plans were that the state would give vaccine to the locals and we would figure out where to get the vaccine to people. But this pandemic has been completely different. The feds in the state have rewritten most of those plans that we had historically, and they've come up with different processes to get the vaccine out. And because we're the last in line to get the vaccine, we need to follow their directions.
Keith?
This chart just briefly shows.
Keith, I have a couple of questions.
Can we hold the questions? I'm almost through.
All right.
We can get to all the questions. So this chart just shows our phase 1B tier 1, how it's distributed across Kitsap. And generally we have about 58,000 people in phase 1B tier 1, and we had 9,000 in phase 1A. Phase 1A is complete, but we're still working off of this phase 1B tier 1. Kitsap has been, although vaccine contributions to Kitsap have been really low, as a county, we're doing really well. We've vaccinated up to 3.5% of our population in Kitsap, which is a little lower than what we had hoped. But what's really interesting is that about 2% of Kitsap residents are getting vaccine from Kitsap. The other 1.5 is getting vaccines from other places in Washington state. And we're seeing the same thing in other counties. Our vaccine progress, this graph just kind of summarizes who's getting vaccine up to date. And again, like I had mentioned earlier, even though like places like Bainbridge have the lowest case counts, they have the highest percentage of phase 1A and phase 1B tier 2 people who have been vaccinated, because their community has just been able to come up with systems outside of public health and outside of healthcare to get their citizens vaccinated. The rest of us throughout the county, we're trying to catch up. Statewide, Kitsap is doing a little better than the rest of the state. As you can see on the bottom left here, Kitsap, we've gotten 3.5% of our community vaccinated, where statewide, they're still below 3.3. So while it seems frustrating that Kitsap may not be getting their fair share, what we get out in 7 days. We're 100% effective in getting all those shots out, and we're doing better than most of the areas in the state. Why can't we move faster? Well, this graph, we've seen this graph shipped to us now 3 weeks in a row. And what you see on the left is the number of doses that have been requested by counties throughout Washington. What you see on the right is what we're going to get for next week. And this is the 3rd week in a row where we're getting roughly half of what we've requested. And as long as vaccine is trickling into the state that slowly, we're going to continue to have starts and fits with getting our vaccines going. Again, this chart just shows that we have plenty of providers now. We just need vaccine capacity. So very, very quickly, the state roadmap to recovery, that's a governor-driven process. Now the entire state is in phase 2. The metrics to move to phase 2 were decreasing trends in the 14-day rate per 100,000, the 14-day rate of hospital admissions, the 7-day percentage of ICU occupancy, and the 7-day % positivity. And again, for our Northwest region, and in fact, South Central now is also in phase 2. All of the state is now in phase 2. What the state is telling us at the moment is there are no plans for phase 3. There are no metrics for phase 3 for at least the next several weeks. They want to see how everybody does with being in phase 2 before they start trying to move us forward because of the upswings in cases that we had earlier and later last year. And I think with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. and we can go from there.
Okay, thanks, Keith. First question was, is contact tracing getting better in Kitsap County?
Contact tracing has been really good from the beginning. We have towards November, when we had so many cases going and we just didn't have the staffing, even though we were working 7 days a week, virtually 24 hours a day. We hired another 40 people here at the health district, provisionally based on funds that we had gotten. We still could not keep up with all the daily contact calls, but we have throughout this entire pandemic done 100% of our cases and done the investigations. And yeah, we're doing pretty good. Where we keep running into issues, though, is the number of close contacts to the positive cases, and that's what continues to drive disease rates in Kitsap. But yeah, we're doing really well on the case investigations and contact tracing.
Oh, great news. Next question, could you clarify what makes a multi-generational household?
Sure, the state defines a multi-generational household as a household that has someone over 65 and younger people below 50. When you get that mix of grandparents helping to watch younger kids, or any type of mix with multiple families in the same household, but it's that mix where you will have older people who wouldn't normally have young generation or young kids in their household with those young kids in the household. And again, the reason that's been prioritized because of those graphs I showed you of that 0 to 60 transmitting and having most of the disease, where the 60 and older being more severely affected from the disease. And that's why they've prioritized, along with the over 65, the 50 and over in those multi-generational households for vaccine.
Thank you. When you talked about the Kitsap facilities and the related numbers for the vaccine distribution, does that include the local tribal health systems?
That does not include the local tribal health system. Our two tribes here in Kitsap, they receive vaccine directly from the federal government versus the non-tribal entities who receive it from the state, the feds to the state. So the tribes are receiving it directly from the federal government. So we don't include them in our numbers because it's not really apples to apples.
Got it. Thank you. And then when you were talking about the Bainbridge number of vaccinations compared to the rest of the county, the question is, do they also have the oldest population in the county?
No, they do not have the oldest population in the county, but vaccine-wise, percentage-wise, they've been able to get from their healthcare providers, and it's mostly been a couple of healthcare providers in coordination with their Bainbridge Island Medical Reserve Corps. Between the two of them, they've just been able to do a lot better job in their smaller community to get vaccine and then get it out quickly. Where the rest of Kitsap County, because it's a larger population, a larger regional area, and because it took us a little longer to get our healthcare outside of Bainbridge mobilized, and right as we got all them mobilized is when we ran into the vaccine shortages. So that was a really unfortunate nexus in time, but we are set up now. So as soon as vaccine starts rolling in, things will start rolling. We'll be getting vaccine rolled out really quickly.
So then would you anticipate those numbers kind of in changing the percentage?
Yes. Okay. Yes, we do expect those numbers to change over. It probably won't happen before the end of March, but hopefully by the end of March, as we get the rest of Kitsap's phase 1B tier 1 vaccinated, we should get closer to being caught up.
Okay, and it looks like we have like 1 minute left. So there's two questions in the Q&A. Where do grocery store workers fall in the vaccination timeline? And then this other one is kind of related to the tribes maybe. How many people do we know or think are part of the MBK, the base vaccinations, and are they part of your numbers?
Good questions. So grocery workers and other essential workers that didn't fall under phase 1A, or because of their age did not fall under phase 1B tier 1, they will be based on age. And again, this is completely different than the way locals had their plans set up, but because the feds and the state forced us to change our plans, essential workers like grocery workers, transit drivers, stuff like that, they will be in phase 1B tier 2 and tier 3 based on their ages. I think phase 1B tier 2 will be those essential workers over 50, and then tier 3 will be those essential workers under 50. So those hopefully will be coming up here towards the middle to the end of March. The federal government, yes, that's a good question. So like the tribes, federal defense workers are just starting to be vaccinated, and that's happening directly through the federal government. The Department of Defense and the Navy are getting vaccine directly from the federal government. It's not coming out of the state share, and it's not being counted in our Kitsap numbers yet. We do hope to eventually merge those numbers so we're getting a better reflection of our community. The other thing I will note is that, like we're seeing a lot of people in our community being able to get vaccine in other counties, a lot of our workers at our federal agencies actually come from Mason, Jefferson, Clallam, Snohomish, King, Pierce, Mason, and Thurston also.
Okay, and just to clarify, when you say defense workers, it's active duty and civil service.
Correct, and even there's a division. The active duty folks, most of them have been getting vaccine for a while now. The civil servants, or the non-enlisted folks, the civil workforce, they have just started getting theirs over the last 2 weeks or so.
Okay, and I am in trouble because we're 2 minutes over, so thank you very much. And if you could just do me a favor, and I think there was one question in chat that did not get addressed, and if you could follow up there on chat, that would be great. Thank you. And if you could release your screen so we can show our video. Thank you all, and it's time for our break.
Great, thanks a lot. And Keith, for the record, that question is about survival rate. So if you could post your thoughts on Kitsap survival rate in the chat, we would appreciate it. Folks, we're going to go to break. We encourage you to take a break. It's important. You know, we've all had our 3-hour Zoom meetings. This is one of them. Coming back, we have, we're going to go into our panel of women professionals talking about how the pandemic has affected them. We'll move into our keynote with Austin-based economic developer John Karras, rise of the work from home workforce, and then we'll finish things off with Congressional Representative Kilmer. Thank you very much. Take a break. See you at 10:30. Hi, everybody. We're back at 10:30, and we are about to introduce our vice chair, Erin Leadham, of the Kitsap Mall, and who has been a part of KEDA for a long time. So, Erin, please take it away.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce the people on our panel this morning. Starting from left to right, Monica Blackwood, who is the CEO of West Sound Workforce. Monica uses her passion for both workforce and economic development to help area companies find employee matches, while she donates her time and talent to the community, being volunteer service on many boards. Brenda Fantroy Johnson. Brenda is the AT&T Chief Security Office, Security Risk Management. Brenda provides leadership in risk management and security protocols at AT&T, while also providing leadership for the City of Bainbridge Island as a newly elected council member. I'll save Linda for last, as Linda is our moderator. Lynette Ladenburg. Lynette is the CEO at Martha & Mary. Assuming the leadership at Martha & Mary in 2016, Lynette has worked to create an organization culture of people first, while providing quality care and services to individuals from infants to end of life. And Ilana, I always mispronounce your name, Elena Imbach, who is the CEO of Vibe Coworks. Elena is transforming the world of work in the West Sound region through co-working, uniting remote workers, commuters, entrepreneurs, and business owners in spaces designed for flexibility, inspiration, and next level collaboration in Kitsap and beyond. And this morning, Linda Espinoza from Cuvée Coaching is our moderator. She has recently relocated to Kitsap County. Linda brings a breadth of experience in business consulting and DEI protocols to help businesses grow and make a difference in their communities.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
We've got you, Linda.
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, KEDA, for giving us the floor to talk about this important issue, which is the effects of COVID-19 for working women. I'm very glad to share this panel with amazing women, but I want to make clear that we are not the most affected women by COVID, right? We have women of color and women of minority communities that have been really affected by this. They have lost it all, or they have to given up everything to be able to care for their families and their children. Having said that, we move on to say that we are happy to lend our voice to start the conversation and to further the conversation, to come up with innovative ways to this important issue. So as we know, even before COVID, women were already on an uneven playing field, right? But now the pandemic is making this uneven field even more evident. Just in January, 275,000 women left the workforce, compared to 71,000 men. And that's not even counting the over 800,000 women who already left the workforce in 2020. The impact, of course, becomes bigger for women of color. The unemployment rate in January 2020 is 8.5% for Black women and 8.8% for Latina women, and 5.1% for white women. That not even counting what women have to do over and above, which means that pretty much they have to spend a full-time job outside of their jobs, if they kept one, to care for their families, to care for their kids, to care for elderly family members or people of high risk in their families. A woman now spends nearly the equivalent of a full-time job doing unpaid childcare or caring for an elderly family member, which is a full working day a week more than an average man. Moreover, it's the financial impact for women who are unable to work due to their increased responsibilities. It can't be denied. The coronavirus has increased the disparities and the stress among women as well. Women of color in particular are likely more exposed to the coronavirus due to the working in essential positions such as healthcare or the service industry, plus all the homeschooling, of course. So what are some of the reasons that why women are leaving the workforce? Of course, something that already existed is the pay gap. When their spouse makes more money than them, it makes more sense for them to leave their job and leave their spouse working. If they have benefits, of course, like healthcare. The lack of flexibility, not only for them as women, but for men. Because if their spouses don't have the flexibility, so they have to leave their lower paid job. Workplace gender discrimination, of course, workplace race discrimination, the closures of childcare and or schools, childcare costs, being the primary caregiver of an elderly or high-risk family member, inequity in the household work, cultural pressure, and of course, the economic sectors that were disproportionately employ women were the most hardest hit for the coronavirus. And that takes me to some Kitsap numbers here. As you can see in red, we have the sectors that have been more hit by the coronavirus. And these are the sectors that are more, that employed women the most. Healthcare, entertainment, accommodation and food services, retail trade, just to say some. So what are some of the impacts that having fewer women in the workforce will result in? It will be companies missing out on important skills and innovation that women bring to the workforce, deepen inequalities along race, class, and gender lines. The global economy will suffer because women won't be able to achieve their full economic potential. And in some social areas, it will be the increase on house population. We're already seeing this with people not being able to pay their rent, pay their mortgages, increase in health problems, because if you don't have you have a house and you have to live outside, you can get COVID-19 and of course other diseases. And increased education gap, of course. If kids don't have a place to study, don't have a place to shelter, the education gap it will be wider. And these are just some of the impacts. There's so much more in there. Okay, start sharing. And now I would like to give the space to Brenda. Brenda, these inequalities have been existing for a while. It's not a new thing. So what is your take on this and how is that affecting the communities of color?
Hi, thank you, Linda. I wanted to thank KEDA also for having this forecast. You know, my experience that I can give to this space is it's rooted in being a Black woman and being a person who, you know, it looks really good right now where I'm at. But if I look back on where I came from, it's real easy for me to put myself into the space of where most people of color are today. You know, it's hard enough trying to run a household, whether you're a single parent or not. But as a woman of color, 9 times out of 10, you are the glue that's holding the household together. And it's really fragile. It's like a deck of cards, you know, that's stacked up on each other. One incident can bring down the whole house, you know, because, you know, they tell you things like, well, you should have money for an emergency. Well, I never had money saved up for an emergency. I don't know how people who are making low income can take money away from the household to save. It's really hard to do that. And so with COVID has really shown a light on all of the inequalities that we already have. You know, they're showing a light on the healthcare system and what's happening there, and how we've lost all of these women out of the workforce, and they may never come back. So, you know, with the COVID, it kind of perpetuates a trauma that marginalized people are already feeling, you know, and it brings back that trauma for me. Just thinking about it, I don't know how I would have been able to survive trying to run a household, trying to have kids who are no longer going to school. You know, they're home with you. And I think about my daughter. My grandson is a special needs child, and she has become stay-at-home mom. She's become teacher. She's become mental health counselor. And, you know, these type of things have an adverse impact for the whole household. And, you know, it's perpetuated throughout the whole community. So it's the stress of the everyday living that you already have, and then the stress of COVID and of seeing and hearing about people that you know or love, or that's even in your circle or in your family. You're hearing about people that are sick and they're in the hospital. Next thing you know, they're on a respirator. And, you know, most of these people who are marginalized are people who are low income wage earners. And they have not been designated as essential, but they're expected to show up to work as if they are essential. I think of our grocery store workers here who are expected to show up, but they're not getting any type of hazard pay as if they were essential. And they're fighting for that. They're fighting really hard for that, to be recognized as essential. It's the same with the teachers. You know, they're being expected to go back and be essential, but they're not being treated as such. So, you know, we have a lot of work to do. And this has really, like I said, shone a light on it. And so it's not hidden anymore. It's out in the open. We know there are inequities, and we have all of this data, you know, and I would think that with all of this information that we have, that we could come together and try to find some solutions. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's things we can do right now that could help people.
I completely agree, Brenda. Thank you so much for that. Alana, you have a very unique position because your business speaks to a lot of people from different walks of life. Can you please tell us a little bit about that and how COVID has impacted them and yourself as a business owner?
Yeah, I'm first off, I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. I think it could be a all-day, multi-day conversation because there's so many intricacies to it and how people are affected at so many different levels. Ironically, so I have 6-year-old twin girls, and I dropped them off at school today, and they're celebrating the 100th day of the school year today, which feels very symbolic and monumental, and you don't know whether to say, man, we survived, or celebrate, but my heart just goes out to, you know, all of the families that have been kind of battling their way through this, the teachers who've showed up in just incredible ways, remotely and in person. You know, so I'm a mom, I'm a business owner, and I own this co-working space where, you know, we believed in the death of the office long before the pandemic started, right? So we built this space for flexibility, for ways that families could commute less, still be around people, escape the isolation of home offices. And what we were seeing even before the pandemic was an increasing percentage of co-working space members globally were women. So in 2019, actually globally, we passed the threshold that more than 50% of co-working space members globally were female. And here at Vibe, that's reflected also. We're at about 54% that identify as female. So the stories are real, as people are at all different places. And I think for me, you know, my interest and passion is also very much on the side of entrepreneurship. And it's been interesting, the Female Founders Alliance over in Seattle has done some studies recently that really speak to me and kind of make me think about where we are as a Kitsap community also. That just ahead of the pandemic, in this group that they surveyed, 87% of the women that they surveyed had plans to start their own business. 6 months into the pandemic, 51% of them had scrapped those plans. And it was primarily due to a need to have a secure financial base.
Absolutely.
And the inability to raise capital. So what's happening now, I think, is really a picture of accentuated privilege, that those who can afford to live without a paycheck are finding ways to move forward and creating businesses, whereas those who cannot are skipping that. So that's kind of one thing that we're looking at, is how do we address that within the Kitsap community? How do we mobilize capital so that our entrepreneurs can do that no matter where they fall on the socioeconomic ladder? Last and finally, two things I would say: if you're an employer, anything you can possibly do to find creative solutions to help on the childcare front is one of the most important things I think we can do as a community to help people be able to balance things. And lastly, however we can encourage people safely within a pandemic conscious awareness, encourage people to get out of the house. We've got 5 co-working spaces across the county. All of them are doing a great job remaining COVID smart. And if we can get people out and kind of have a change of environment, that helps with the mental and social piece as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Elena. Monica, I don't see you, but I know you're there.
Hi.
Oh, there you are. Sorry. I see two there. You have a job placement company. So how have you seen the effect on women looking for jobs? Please tell us.
Sure. So I thought about this conversation and agree with everybody that that this topic is so incredibly important, and we're just really today just kind of dipping our tiny toe into this big, huge sea of conversation that really needs to happen. I could share some in-depth stories, like an employee of ours that had to make the shift in their housing at the very beginning of this and move into a multi-generational home because of the way that it was affecting them. They weren't the primary caregiver of the elder in her home a year ago, but things changed on a dime, of course, when COVID hit. Because of the fragility of the elder, she had to quit work and go into isolation and become the primary caregiver, so as not to have outside individuals regularly coming into the home and potentially creating exposure. We still talk to this individual who is really anxious to get back to work, but she can't yet. We're still waiting. I could tell you a story about a single mom who a year ago had a very small support circle to assist her because she wasn't from this area, and found that COVID meant that those whom she relied upon for help were no longer able to do so because households were strongly encouraged to only stay within themselves in order to prevent transmission. This meant that she no longer had the ability to go to work certain hours of the day because childcare wasn't available in the evenings. And therefore, she went from full-time to part-time. Not a huge wage rate either. So again, like Brenda talked about, this really has hit the lower wage spectrum rather hard. I can also tell you a story about an employee that just last month, not at the beginning of the chaos, but just last month, told us that she needed to quit because her daughter was failing middle school. The best interest of the daughter was that the mom was going to focus solely at home, sitting side by side with her, doing the best as a full-time teacher that she's not trained in the hours when her daughter wasn't on Zoom with her classes. I can go on and on about those stories and give more detail, but I'm sure as business leaders and managers of people, you can put faces to those you know to these stories. I can also tell you a little bit about my own experience in all of this. As a business owner, wondering how to navigate through the trials of the pandemic and keeping people safe and employed. As a person who has known all of my parental life that I am not the type of person to work or stay at home 100% of the time. It's just not for me. I'm the hybrid kind of gal. As a mom to a couple of teenagers, trying to help them with that new math and the Spanish classes of a language that I don't speak, as well as a balance in the social development they'd normally be getting. As a wife / quasi-therapist to a husband who is an adjunct professor at a local college, has only taught one class in summer session and then did not teach a class again until last month, which meant that he was worried about his income, but more so worried about the healthcare benefits that he provides for our family. And that continues because his class load is so low. As a sister, I drove to Yakima to help my sister out with her childcare needs as a single parent. As a daughter with aging parents who have healthcare issues or have health issues, and ultimately my mental and emotional stress that I carry. But again, you can put faces to that. So really quickly, looking forward, here are some of the things that I worry about. We mentioned the wage gap. That's one of the things that I worry about. Workforce Central published an analysis of the wage gap in Pierce County just yesterday. I suggest that you check it out. There's some hints to some Kitsap numbers. It can help inform you as you revisit pay aspects for your teams. From mental and emotional health, there's so many studies and reports on this and real life examples. It's pretty evident how mental and emotional health of our workforce and our people getting jobs done next to us physically or virtually can play a part in the functionality of our workforce teams overall.
Absolutely. Monica, I'm sorry to cut you here. We're going to come back to you, but I want to talk to Lynette as well. Sure. And Lynette, you have a very unique situation as well, because you own a healthcare, you do elderly care and childcare. Can you please talk about the solutions that you've implemented in your company to make it work?
Absolutely. And of course, I don't own it. Martha and Mary is a nonprofit here in Paulsbo. My story is probably a little different. My kids are adults and grown, and at Martha and Mary, we just continued to come to work. Martha and Mary was essential workers and on the front line. We had the nursing home, the health center, assisted living, independent living, our at-home services for our seniors, childcare and our before and after school programs. So healthcare and senior living and childcare are primarily dominated by women. You know, there's a the industry is mostly women. So my story is of them. So a year ago when COVID hit, and it's amazing, it's been a year, everyone was scared. We had to come to work. We had to keep protecting our children and our residents and families. And we didn't know what to do. So we just dug in and started to work together. Our mission is to protect and was to protect all that we serve and we care for. So we focused on safety, learning everything we possibly could, purchasing our PPE, reading everything from CMS, the state, the county, the health district. We learned everything we could to protect those around us. And then we became on information overload. We were getting, I swear, hundreds of emails every day on what to do and how to do it, because, you know, nursing homes were kind of at the core of it. So then, you know, people were scared. And so we had people retire. We had people stop working due to caring for the loved ones that were either older or at risk, or they were older. And so we had to get together and do flexible schedules, and everybody just teamed together and did what they had to do to protect each other, worked out, you know, how people can work if their spouse was home, if their grandparent could take care of the kids and stuff. So everybody just kind of worked together to make it happen. Then the schools closed and childcare was only for the essential workers. And that was hard because we were in a situation where companies before us, we were in a situation where we had to lay off people. And they were scared, and we didn't want to lose our employees. And so we offered them jobs at the health center to help with infection control. So we were able to keep everyone who wanted to stay employed, we were able to keep everyone employed. And we just managed through it. And then, you know, fast forward a little bit, we did experience COVID and in the nursing home, and we managed it and was out in 5 weeks. But I watched single moms. I watched people just do what they had to do, put on the protective gear, jump in. One of our incredible nurses, she's a single mom of 3, and she had to be the unit manager, and she just did it. And it was amazing. And her family supported her and worked with her, and everybody did. So now we fast forward to today, and the majority of our staff and residents have been vaccinated. We continue to wear a surgical mask, eye protection, social distance, hand sanitizer, you name it. We've seen what this does, and it works. And then when we started 2021, because all of 2020 was how to keep people safe, how to manage COVID, to learn everything we possibly could. We were tested all the time, weekly, monthly, you name it. And so we started 2021 saying, we need to get back to business. We know how to manage COVID, and we need to continue to grow and serve the community. And so we managed it. And if COVID continues the next 6 months, the next year, which it will, and we'll probably live in this world for quite a while, we need to figure out it's time to get back to business. So that's kind of where we're at today. And even though we've been going through this and everybody has been frontline workers and being here, we've also experienced isolation. We've experienced isolation here at Martha and Mary because we have to stay in our offices. We have to stay on our own units. At the childcare centers, we can't let the families in. It's just employees who are hands-on, and it's the children. So we have all sorts of protective ways. Our residents, just now with the going into phase 2, we can do some small activities, but they've been isolated as well. So we're managing through, but I just want to say, if anything from my conversation and anything here, for the healthcare workers, the essential workers who have put their lives on the line for hospital, from the hospital, nursing homes, police, fire departments, please wear a mask, social distance, use your hand sanitizer. And when your time comes to get vaccinated, please, if you're able, do it. We've seen the benefits. We had an employee who was vaccinated. Her loved ones in the house got COVID really bad these last few weeks, and she did not get it. She wore her mask, did what you're supposed to do, and she was vaccinated, and everything was fine. So I just want to thank you on behalf of the employees, the residents, children's, and family of Martha and Mary. And again, please get vaccinated if you can. I think Keith talked about the importance of just social distance. Keep this up so we can get back, the economy can get back, and we can get back to life as we know it. It will be different, but we can manage this. And it's all about staying safe and protecting each other.
Thank you so much, Lynette. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your perspective. It's so important to know. Do we have any questions from the audience? If we don't, then I would love for each of you to give me a little nugget. What do you think organizations like KEDA or the government, of the Chamber of Commerce, little things that you think that we can do to make this better, to not let women stay out of the work? We have 30 seconds each. Brenda, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that one thing that businesses can do is, whether or not your employees have been designated as essential. If you're calling them to work every day, you should assume they're essential. and try to find a way to help them, whether it's with hazard pay or childcare. We have to support each other until, someone from federal government or somewhere, because most of the monies that were given out to people didn't hit a lot of the marginalized people. And so they're still struggling. That's my nugget.
Thank you, Brenda. Alana?
I think my parting words, just to remember that we know that people are happier, healthier, and more productive when they have control over where and when they work, especially parents, and especially as they're trying to juggle all of these different pieces of their work and family life. So if you are an employer, find ways to support that flexibility. And again, we've got some great co-working spaces here that can be a helpful part of that puzzle.
Thank you, Alana. Monica?
Two quick things. First of all, give grace to everybody as we assimilate back into this normal life. We all think we're ready, but we've been hunker down mode for a year now. So it's gonna take us psychologically some time to get back up to speed. And secondly, for employers, use the tool from ADA, and that's interactive process. When you're talking with your employees and working through the process of getting them back to work, experiment on ideas. And, of course, I wouldn't be an HR person if I didn't say document it all, but that's going to be the way that we begin to bring equity back into our workplace for all of those who are caregiving and shouldering things outside of our job responsibilities.
Thank you. Lynette?
I think being from the healthcare and childcare field, the only thing I can say is please protect yourself, protect your loved ones, continue to social distance, continue to wear your mask, surgical mask if you can, they're the best, N95s. And if you are able, please get your vaccination. Please, we have to stop this. We have to get back to business and the economy to survive. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I just want to end here saying that so many innovative solutions will come to the table, and we need women for that. That is super important. But as well, we need to make sure to include the communities of color that are usually overlooked. And we can make decisions for them. It's very important to reach out to these communities and include them in these decisions. They will know, they will tell you exactly what they need. And that's when we really will reach equity, when everyone is at the table making these decisions. Thank you so much. Thank you, KEDA. Thank you to all the amazing panelists. We really appreciate this space to talk about this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for that great job in moderation. Thank you to all our panelists. And we acknowledge that there is not nearly enough time to explore the space around this topic. Thanks to Katie Walters, who posted a Facebook post in the chat. There is going to be an upcoming April event on this topic. And so please look for that. And if KEDA can be of any help, let us know. That's part of what we're here to do. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, John Karras, someone who has devoted his career to the bold idea that every community has the potential to become a more vibrant place. He is the VP of Business Development at TIP Strategies, channeling his energy to empower economic development professionals and leaders with the knowledge and tools needed to make their communities more vibrant. John's economic development work has taken him to 30 US states, Mexico, and Canada, and he's built a reputation as a leading thinker on urban revitalization trends and their impact on economic development. John is the founder of urbanscale.com. He founded that in 2013, which introduced the first comprehensive measure of how urban a city is on a scale of 1 to 10. Opinion pieces and research from Urban Scale have been featured in Planetizen, Outside Magazine's Best Places to Live, dozens of local media outlets around the US. John lives in Austin, Texas with his wife and son, where he lives out his obsession of finding and tasting the world's best tacos and barbecue. Please join me in welcoming, and let's turn things over to John Karras.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Joe, for the introduction. And it's been a great session so far. I've really enjoyed hearing all of the perspectives from everybody so far today. And as I'm sharing my screen here, I just want to also say that it is somewhat of a miracle that I am even here with y'all today. If you haven't been following the national news, Texas has been in a very, very much an unprecedented situation. We've had power outages. In fact, we about 3 to 4 million customers were without power earlier this week due to, we're now on the 5th winter storm. So it's actually snowing again, snow and ice for the 5th time over the past week here in Austin, a place which is really one of the southernmost cities in the US. In fact, we're 200 miles farther south than San Diego, so we're not used to this. And I still have a lot of coworkers without power, and we're now under a boil water restriction and barely a trickle of water coming out of our kitchen sink. And in fact, my wife and son we've been kind of surviving here, and we've actually taken in another household. My sister, her apartment building, water pipes burst the floor below her, and massive flooding. So we've taken her in as well. And so I just wanted to say thank you. And this is a timely topic in many ways, but the question of how are communities responding to this significant increase in remote work that has been kind of happening over the last couple of decades and has been accelerated by the pandemic. That's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about. I'll give you a quick introduction about our company and our work, talk about some of the larger national context, although Hart and James did a great job of setting the stage with the overall economic trends, so I won't spend much time on that. We'll spend most of the time this morning talking about the implications of remote work, and we do need to talk about a little bit about broadband. No discussion around working remotely and working from home can take place without talking about that issue. And then I'll share with you a few case studies of communities around the country that are doing some creative things around attracting and retaining talent in this environment of remote work. So our firm, as Joe mentioned, we are an economic development consulting firm. We work with cities, counties, regions, and states on putting together strategies for economic development. And the team that we have, I did want to point out one person, Jeff Marcel, is one of our partners, and he's actually based in the Seattle area. So some of you know him. We also have about half of our team were remote workers prior to COVID, including remote workers in Portland and Dallas and Boston, and even some of our team here in Austin were working remotely well before COVID-19. So when we think about the national context, obviously the realities that we've been dealing with, the pandemic and then the economic downturn, and some of these other longer term issues that have not gone away related to climate change and the social unrest and the social inequities that have been around really forever, but are coming to light in new ways. All of these realities are affecting our economy in different ways. And we could spend the entire time talking about any one of these effects on commuting patterns and how they've been changed, or how supply chains have been restructured, or how commercial real estate is being upended by people working remotely. But I really did want to talk more specifically about how COVID-19 has changed how we work. Of course, it's changed a lot of other things. It changed how students in K through 12 schools are learning. It's changed how we've made purchases. E-commerce was growing rapidly before COVID-19, but it was still less than 12% of all retail sales were happening online as late as end of 2019, and that has increased significantly. But remote work is the change that I wanted to spend the most time talking about here. So when we think about remote work, up until recently, I think a lot of us had in mind, who is a remote worker? And this is the type of person that a lot of us probably thought about. the young, let's just say it, young, pretty well-educated, privileged, white male tech worker. The poster child for that is Tim Ferriss. He wrote a book called The 4-Hour Work Week about a decade ago, and he actually has relocated to Austin from the San Francisco area a couple of years ago. But there was sort of this perception that the few lucky people working remotely were like him, young, tech-savvy, entrepreneurial. But the reality was we had a long, steady growth of people, full-time workers working remotely in the US for the last decade or more. As recently as 2019, this data comes from the American Community Survey from the US Census Bureau. It's from the question that asks, how do you commute to work? And I first came upon this data several years ago and didn't realize at the time that it was growing at such a significant pace. So how do you commute to work? Drive alone, take transit, or do you work from home? So it went from under 4% right before the Great Recession of our total workforce was a full-time remote worker working from home to just under 6% in 2019, which may not sound like a lot, but out of an entire workforce of people working, about nearly 160 million employed people, that's about 10 million people that were working remotely full-time, not just 1 or 2 days a week, but most of the time prior to COVID. And when you looked at the geographic differences, this is really interesting. And if you had to pick one data point that measured the desirability of a community, and this is something that you would look at, the share of people working remotely across the 100 largest metro areas, some places like Austin, like Denver, some of those communities, Portland, Oregon, had way more people working remotely than the US average, and even more so than some of the metro areas where there were far fewer people working remotely, places like Buffalo, New York, or Wichita, Kansas. And I've included in here the Puget Sound region, which is actually the combined statistical area that includes not just Seattle and Tacoma, but also Kitsap County and some of the surrounding counties. And your share of full-time remote workers was significantly higher than the US average. Again, all of this was prior to COVID-19, but it gives a window into where talent was choosing to live in some of these communities. And when we look at smaller metros, the share of remote workers was even higher in places like Boulder, Colorado, and Bend, Oregon, places that many of you are familiar with as being magnets for tech workers and entrepreneurs. People that can live and choose to live and work anywhere have been choosing certain places more so than other places. So then, obviously, all of that data was pre-COVID. Then all of a sudden, work from home was forced upon tens of millions of people. And that has changed everything from how, where we choose to live and work in many cases, but it's also changed the decisions of many large companies. This is an example of Pinterest. They were preparing to move into a newly designed headquarters in San Francisco. And this summer, they paid $90 million to break their lease because they were seeing some of the same things that many other companies were looking at, that their workforce was going to continue to work remotely. And they made that decision that we're going to allow our employees to continue to work remotely, and we're going to pay this incredible amount of money to get out of this lease so that we aren't stuck with the burden of that office space that we aren't going to use. Same thing has happened in other large tech companies like Twitter. They've told their employees, not just during the pandemic, but you can continue working remotely forever. And there was a large survey of San Francisco Bay Area tech workers, over 4,000 workers, and they asked them, if you were able to work remotely indefinitely, would you consider leaving the San Francisco Bay Area? And about two thirds of them said, yes, we would consider that, which has huge implications on talent attraction for other communities around the country, including the Puget Sound region and Kitsap County. Now, closer to home, a lot of you are very familiar with this story. Just like Pinterest, REI, of course, built their brand new, very high-end corporate headquarters in the Seattle area, and they sold it for $368 million is what they built it. I don't know what the sale price was, that wasn't disclosed, but they're re-examining every aspect of their business operation because of the new rise of remote work, and seeing that as a long-term thing that's going to continue to be with us. So when we think about how long is this going to last and what are the permanent changes, this was another survey that was done last summer, a few months into the pandemic, from office workers, but also executives. And before the pandemic, there was a significant portion of companies that really didn't have hardly anybody working from home. And when we see the answer to the question post COVID-19, there's going to be just about 10% of these companies are going to expect to not have a lot of remote work happening. So it's really going to be with us in the long term. And that's going to have ripple effects on not just the current commercial office space in the Seattle area. You've had one of the highest rates of increased vacancies in commercial office space. I think second just to New York and San Francisco, looking at large commercial office markets. It's going to have implications on the design and construction of new space, of course. And if we have all this parking, how do we think about it differently if people are coming into work just 1 or 2 days a week rather than 5 days a week to the office? Residential is obviously a huge consideration. The home office is no longer a novelty or a luxury, but is seen as a necessity for construction of new homes in many cases. And then some of the larger questions that we're just starting to try to understand and see what the changes will be related to demographic shifts, urban versus suburban, bigger city to smaller communities, even university towns. When you've had a 1-year decline in enrollment of 16% for first-time undergraduate students, that's a huge change that's going to have lasting impacts on a lot of university towns. But let's take the urban and suburban question on for just a minute. So this was in 2010. This is a photo of downtown San Antonio. That's not the Space Needle in Seattle, but it kind of has some similarities there. So the mayor, incoming mayor Julian Castro in 2010 declared that was going to be the decade of downtown for San Antonio, and very much it was, and it was across the country. Probably the best decade that downtowns and central business districts have had, not just in large cities, but also smaller communities and even main streets in rural communities. Probably the best decade that downtowns have had in terms of new investment, people moving in, businesses opening from offices to restaurants and retail and entertainment since maybe the 1950s. So probably one of the best decades that downtowns have had in generations. The question is, with this huge disruption, will the next 10 years be a shift away from downtowns and urban cores into the suburbs? This is very much an open question. We're just starting to try to understand what some of the initial data is telling us. And this looks at, and I apologize, this data is still, it's a few months old now, but it shows a clear trend line with rental apartments in downtown areas across the country and suburban areas across the country that really trended together until the pandemic. And then you had a sharp increase in vacancy rates in rental apartments in downtowns and a continued decrease in vacancy rates in rental housing in suburban areas. So this could be a blip, but it could also, even if it is a blip, it's a significant one. But there is a question in places like Kitsap County that are in close proximity to the urban core of Seattle, especially Bainbridge, but the entire county for that matter. And how can you attract and retain workers if the urban core is losing them, at least in the near term, in some cases? So this is very much an open question. Now, I'm so glad that we have been having discussions so far in this event about social inequity, because we can't really go too far down this path of talking about remote work without addressing that not everybody can work from home. As we just heard, obviously, there are a lot of essential workers in healthcare and other occupations that never had that option and will not have that option. But there's also a huge racial and ethnic disparity between remote workers. If we looked at the racial and ethnic mix of remote job occupations, white workers are far more likely to work in these types of work from home jobs, whereas Black and Hispanic workers are disproportionately less likely to work in remote work occupations. So that's something that we need to take into account, especially if we are designing future economic growth strategies based on attracting and retaining remote workers, which we'll get to in a little bit. How can we make that more equitable and more accessible to our entire community? So we haven't really talked about, well, is it a good thing for a community to become a magnet for remote workers, and what are the economic benefits? So there's a number of them, and I'll share with you some examples of communities that are actively recruiting and trying to attract remote workers into their community, and this is why they're doing it. There's a number of benefits to this. The first one, you can solve workforce needs for some of your existing employers. It is a double-edged sword if some of your existing employers can access talent wherever they can find it. But these remote workers, they purchase or rent homes in your city or your county. They spend money at local businesses. They help build networks between their colleagues and the people that they do business with in other communities around the country. And they actually contribute to entrepreneurial activity, something that Joe is very familiar with from his days in Alaska, working in the entrepreneurial space. And they also contribute to placemaking. The question of will main streets survive? I think having more people working remotely, they don't want to spend all of their time in their home office or in their garage. They do want to go out into the community and go to those active places in mixed use districts and downtowns. So they do contribute to that. And just the greater connections to other regions is something else that's a big benefit. And one that I would add to this as well, there's one more benefit. I think that James and Hart would back me up on this, the economic diversification. If you think about an extreme where a community relies on one large employer, several decades ago, it was very much Boeing for the state of Washington, and the Seattle region and the state have diversified with tech companies, Microsoft and Amazon, still, large companies, but more of them. That's more of a risk to be dependent on a single large employer or large industry like aerospace. But when you become a magnet for remote workers, you're really diversifying your economy in the best way possible. Because if you were to attract 100 remote workers, they're going to be working at probably dozens of different companies across many different industries. Whereas if you were to attract a single company that employed 100 workers, that's one company in one industry. So if something happens with them negative, then you're losing a lot of those jobs and that investment. So I did mention that we wanted to talk about the broadband challenge, but let's go back even a little bit earlier. So I love this quote. One of our partners, John Roberts, was giving a presentation well over 2 decades ago about the emergence of high-tech economic development. And this was in Fredericksburg, Texas, if you're familiar with a small community about an hour and a half west of Austin, north of San Antonio. And he was talking about how communities need to position themselves to attract computer technology companies. This was in the 1990s when Austin was becoming a major tech hub, kind of following in the footsteps of the Seattle area and the Puget Sound region. And he just finished up his presentation, and there was this old Texas farmer in the back of the room who raised his hand and said, yeah, that all sounds great, but don't it all run on electricity? And that question has been haunting us ever since, because it is so true that there is basic infrastructure that has to exist. And we'll get to broadband here in a minute, but even backing up from that, you can't have broadband without electricity. So this notion of basic infrastructure that has been driven home all too well for those of us here in Texas this week. But it even gets more basic than electricity. So let's go back another 150 years. This is in London in 1845, the story of John Snow. Not the Jon Snow you're thinking of. This is not Game of Thrones, but he was a doctor who's actually famous in epidemiological circles, who was looking at data and trying to understand the origins of the cholera outbreak and mapping where the deaths from cholera happened in relation to where the water pumps were. Noticed that almost all of the deaths were highly clustered around one particular water source. And it took a long time for people to really understand this. But once he was able to get his message heard by local officials, people started to realize that clean water was critical to prevent the spread of disease. That they didn't know that prior to this. So after that, we as cities around the world, first starting in London and then in the US later on and elsewhere, we redesigned our infrastructure based on this need. So I think we really need to rethink our infrastructure, and this applies obviously water and electricity. When automobiles were introduced at a mass level, we redesigned our transportation infrastructure. So now that we've seen just how critical broadband internet, high-speed internet is for the functioning of a modern economy, we really have to rethink our infrastructure. And let's start with just how well do we understand broadband? It's actually pretty complicated, more so than maybe we would like to think. The providers themselves have a number of concerns that are pretty messy and not very well understood. The location of the fiber, the last mile connectivity. Google Fiber which made a lot of waves when it first rolled out in Kansas City, and then here in Austin, we were the second city to receive Google Fiber, which was at the time was going to be the fastest internet available anywhere. And it took them several years longer to actually put that internet infrastructure into place for people to have it in their homes. We finally got Google Fiber here just about 2 years ago, which was several years after it was first announced. And then of course there's concerns at the customer level, the equipment itself, the cost, the speed. So it really is complicated. And the question of rural versus urban, the biggest challenge in a lot of rural areas, the broadband internet just isn't there in a lot of lower density communities. And in urban areas, it exists along the main lines, but it's not equitably distributed. We're working in Richmond, Virginia right now, which is a community that has dealt with a lot of racial tensions this year, as has Seattle and Portland and many other communities. And there are still large sections of the community that suffered from redlining of homes in the past, that there's still, in some ways, the remnants of that are affecting access to internet. So that's something that really needs to be addressed. And the consequences of not properly addressing the broadband internet challenge at the local and regional and state level, if you don't do this, your business environment, your tax base are going to suffer. You aren't going to be able to retain, much less attract talent from outside the area. And the social inequalities will be further exacerbated if not everybody has access to reliable, affordable, high-speed internet. So how should we respond as communities? Really getting a shared understanding as much as possible about where that infrastructure is, how can it be accessed, and surveying actually who has that access, how much does it cost, what does it take to get it to those that do not have it. And then using a lot of the strategies, and there's a lot of tax dollars and investments that are going in from the federal government and at the state level that are providing new resources for the extension of broadband internet to communities. So this is something that a lot of the rural broadband strategies should be continued, and lessons learned from that applied to more urban areas as well. So I think in the last few minutes here before we dive into a Q&A, I did want to share with you a few case studies of how different communities are rethinking their workforce attraction efforts in light of remote work. And the first one that I wanted to start with is a really creative program that was put in place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a couple of years ago, actually. And it was funded by one of their local foundations. And their goal was to attract remote workers to their community and pay them an incentive of $10,000. But it wasn't just about the incentive. It was also about providing a community of people that where those remote workers could thrive. And the founder of this, the person who's been running the program, Aaron Bolzel, I saw him speak at a conference a couple of years ago. He was one of those San Francisco Bay Area tech workers who was originally from Tulsa and relocated to Tulsa and was working remotely and thought, hey, this is so much more affordable. I wonder if there are other people out there that would benefit from a move like this. And they had 100 applications the first year, 70 people accepted. It was about a 50-50 split of men and women, nearly 50% non-white. And about 25 of those people from the first year actually purchased homes. A couple of them started businesses, and they got a lot of media attention as well. And as you can imagine, with this rise of remote work, they've been very well positioned, and they've expanded the program and have accepted about 250 people in 2020. And it's been so successful. Of course, I do have to mention again, it was funded by a local foundation, so they had the resources to create this incentive, that there's been a number of, I guess you could say, copycat programs in the Muscle Shoals region of Northwest Alabama, Topeka, Kansas. There's been a lot of other communities that have been trying this remote worker attraction effort. And there's actually one really creative one. I was just talking with the economic development director in Wichita Falls, Texas, which is a community that has a military base and a major university. And they've been struggling to attract and retain talent. And they're creating a somewhat different incentive program that's similar to this, where they will pay a company $7,500 for every job that employs a local resident living in Wichita Falls, Texas, regardless of where that company is, whether they're in Kitsap County or in New York City. And the goal around that was to create jobs for local talent to be able to remain in the community. So they're just starting to put that into place. I'm not even sure if it's been approved yet, but as of a few weeks ago, this was in the works with their local economic development organization. So beyond just remote workers in particular, I did want to point out a couple of creative talent attraction efforts going on in other communities. So this is a joint program from the San Diego Economic Development Corporation and their tourism promotion group. They put into place this campaign to attract STEM workers and technology workers to support their life sciences industry. And the campaign was Just Say No to Winter. And they were trying to target people living in Boston, New York, and Chicago to relocate to San Diego, where the cost of living was similar or maybe even a little bit less, and live a lifestyle that was the more relaxed and with warm weather. Now they have shifted their focus more to talent retention since the pandemic started, because a lot of their local science and technology workers were out of work. So they're trying to connect them to local employment opportunities. So that's a really kind of a creative example. Taking a completely different approach, this is one of our clients in Wausau, Wisconsin, between Green Bay and Minneapolis, a smaller community that has put into place a talent attraction effort, a website and a campaign and a rebranding of the community that's really embracing the cold weather and the winter, and positioning the community as a place where every type of outdoor recreation, from skiing to whitewater rafting to hiking and biking can help attract people to the community. And I mentioned this example earlier, so I won't linger on this, but for Richmond, Virginia, the plan that we're working with them on right now, it's very much talent retention and attraction, but also addressing those inequities of broadband access. So with that, I think we can, if there's time for a couple of questions, either now or after. And yes, the state of Vermont, I'm seeing that was also one of the very early examples of a talent attraction incentive. And they actually had that as an example in here and pulled that out just to kind of save time. But you're absolutely right. That was one of the early programs that a lot of other communities and states have been trying to copy and learn from.
Okay, so John, in the Q&A, the first question is, for those leaving the cities working remotely, what are the most important criteria when they're looking for their new home?
Wow, that's a great question. So it really is a question of what do people look for when they're trying to come up with a place that they would see themselves and their family living in long term. And a lot of that has to do with lifestyle. Some people love the mountains, some people love the beach, some people don't want cold weather, some people don't want hot weather. So those types of preferences come into play. Future employment opportunities, whether they're remote or not, for yourself, and especially for if you have a spouse or another person in your family who works in a certain industry. Those are big considerations, which is something that the folks in Wichita Falls designing that program, a lot of this was focused on military spouses that were there because of the Air Force Base. So you have a big military presence in Kitsap County. So that's something that I'm sure that you've been working on for many years, is how to engage the, I guess the trailing spouse challenge with a lot of military folks, as well as retiring military is another angle of that. But yeah, it's really we could spend the rest of the time kind of talking about all the list of things that you look for in a community. But the amenities, the available and affordable housing relative to your income, and then just the overall diversity of the community and acceptance of the community is another aspect that's really important.
Okay, the second question was, given your remarks, don't you logically feel broadband should be declared an essential public service like sewer, water, etc.? And if not, why not?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, we have been pushing a lot of our clients, especially public sector, cities and counties, to make changes to their development, their land use and development and permitting, that you should not permit another residential unit or commercial building, whether it's new construction or significant renovation, without ensuring that high-speed internet is built into that, because you wouldn't permit a new house or a new apartment without putting in running water and electricity. At this point, moving forward, you should not do that without broadband either. So I would completely agree with that statement.
Okay, this is probably the last question based on time. How does a community coordinate and support their buy local campaigns and their efforts to attract remote workers?
Ooh, that's a great question. So we've seen a lot of creative examples around the country, especially with Main Street associations and downtown groups, but even traditional countywide economic development organizations like the Kitsap EDA to support local businesses. It's a lot of small businesses, they're not able to do their work remotely, but having those remote workers in your community and connecting them to those resources is critical. And I would say that the work that you've already done as a community, as a county, on supporting local businesses with your buy local campaigns has been critical and essential. And there's certainly a connection point there between the remote workers and supporting local businesses. So they're both essential and important, and being able to retain that talent and attract them to your community is going to continue to support your local businesses. But I think the point was made earlier that ensuring that your smaller, especially retail and restaurant businesses, are connected to that e-commerce infrastructure. So that would be something that would be really important moving forward as well, with more and more investment going into e-commerce and sales online. Your local small businesses are going to need that to be able to succeed and stay viable moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
All right, I did it. I was on mute. It happened. John, thank you so much for joining us from snowy, icy, sleety Austin, Texas. How does that even work? We're all looking forward to the days when we can get together and hopefully head to Austin and get some of that barbecue. Or you can join us here again in Kitsap. We connected with John through the Washington Economic Development Alliance, who we'll hear more from in March probably. But let's go to Congressman Kilmer, representing the 6th District here in Washington. Congressman Kilmer has long been a bipartisan champion of economic causes. He is a local. He is from the Olympic Peninsula. Representative Kilmer, you have the floor.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to see you. I want you to know I've spent most of the last 10 months speaking into a muted computer, so I am empathetic to what you just went through. Good morning, everybody. I am very happy to be joining you for this fantastic event to deliver some updates from the other Washington and talk a bit about the economic forecast for Kitsap County. I love this event. I love hearing from economists. Who doesn't like starting their day listening to economists? I confess, I only have one economist joke, and it comes from a sign that hung in the econ department when I was in college. It said, there are 3 kinds of economists, those that can count and those that can't. I didn't say I had a good economist joke. It's just my only economist joke. Now, despite my penchant for bad jokes, I am very grateful to KEDA for still inviting me to speak with everybody today. I would have much preferred getting to see everybody in person at the Suquamish Casino like last year. That was fun. And I'm convinced that with just a bit more observation, I will eventually understand the rules of craps. One wrinkle in this virtual environment that we're operating in is that every once in a while, with 2 kids attending virtual school right above my head and my wife working full-time from home as well, my internet will tell me that my connection is unstable, which honestly seems fitting these days for an update from Washington, D.C. But having said that, so apologies if I do have any Wi-Fi problems. Over the course of the next 79 minutes, over the course of the next 7 to 9 minutes, I hope my internet sticks with me. And if nothing else, hopefully we'll see if any of my jokes are landing. But in all seriousness, there is no doubt that these have been trying times for all of us. About a year ago, we all saw our worlds turned upside down by a once-in-a-century global pandemic. Our local employers and small businesses had to drastically adapt to changing conditions. Community events had to be canceled or moved virtual, and countless parents, just like me, have had to come to the uncomfortable realization that they have mostly forgotten middle school math. But through all of this, an unwavering truth has stood clear to me, and that is that Kitsap County is resilient. I am actually really bullish about the future of our region. You know, some of you may already know this, but before running for Congress, I worked for over 10 years professionally in economic development at KEDA's sister organization in Pierce County. And in that job, I would sit down with employers of all sizes and just try to get a sense of what they need to stay and to grow in our community. And while as a member of Congress, my business card and title have changed, my job description really hasn't. I am still focused on creating more economic opportunity for more people in more places. And it's that motivation that's kept me fighting to ensure that small businesses and workers in our region have access to the relief and to the resources that they need, not only to survive this pandemic, but to emerge stronger on the other side of it. And when you look at economic recovery, it's not the big guys leading the way. It's our small businesses that generate the most job growth during recoveries. And I know you are all aware of this and share my desire to see street employers in Kitsap County continuing to lead our region's economic recovery. So that's why at the end of last year, you saw Congress come together on a bipartisan basis to pass a comprehensive package focused on delivering support for our region's small businesses, a new round of Paycheck Protection Program loans, direct help for organizations like live performance venues and independent movie theaters and cultural institutions that, simply put, may just be facing some limitations when you can't have people sitting in tight quarters shoulder to shoulder. Some set-asides for community-based lenders and some steps to help minority-owned businesses. All of that was included in the legislation in December. On top of that, to support workers, we also extended and improved the employee retention tax credit to help keep workers in their jobs during COVID closures or reductions in revenue. And I would encourage folks who haven't had a chance to look at that employee retention tax credit was really improved quite a bit from the way it stood in the CARES Act. So I encourage people to take a look at that. The bill that passed also provides billions in dollars to accelerate the free and equitable distribution of vaccines to as many Americans as possible, as quickly as possible. And just this week, President Biden announced that by the end of the summer, there should be enough vaccines to vaccinate nearly the entire US population. That's good news. I am heartened by that, and I'm committed to ensuring that that actually happens and that our state's distribution efforts contribute to the achievement of that goal. I do want to shout out the incredible work of the Kitsap Public Health District and all of our medical community members who are working day and night to ensure that folks in our neck of the woods can get access to the vaccine. You are all heroes, and I am just very, very grateful for what you're doing. I should also mention, as I move from the rearview mirror into the windshield, Congress is also working on a new round of relief called the American Rescue Plan. It is expected that the House will vote on this within the next couple weeks, and that will further fund vaccinations, provide some additional immediate direct relief to families that are bearing the brunt of this crisis, and support struggling communities across the country. It includes another round of rebate checks, support for vaccine development, production, distribution, additional funds for testing and contact tracing, additional aid to small businesses, some funds to support state, local, and tribal governments so that we don't see a round of public sector layoffs that prolong this recession. Extending unemployment benefits, which right now are slated to expire on the 14th of March, and then some additional help for renters and for landlords. We're expecting to get this passed before the 14th of March, when unemployment benefits are slated to expire. So while much of the focus has been on just trying to stop the bleeding, I think you'll see a pivot in a few months to trying to get this economy off the mat. There's a real opportunity for a bipartisan infrastructure package. Listen, the American Society of Civil Engineers grades American infrastructure as a D+. If my kiddos had that on their report card, I wouldn't be too happy with that. None of us should be happy with that. So I think that presents a real opportunity to invest in roads and bridges and wastewater and stormwater and, importantly, broadband. We want to be sure that as we see federal infrastructure investments, that we're doing all we can to bring those dollars to Kitsap County and to support the build out of good jobs that provide family wages for folks in our region. So I want you to know, as those conversations around infrastructure continue, we're going to keep working to stay in touch with all of you. Please do the same, especially regarding any local initiatives that we can support. We're already part of an effort, and I know the KEDA team is as well, trying to ensure that we fix the issues at Gorst, which not only involve people sitting in traffic, but are a real concern for the Navy with regard to resiliency, and present a real opportunity for us to see job growth up at the Bremerton Airport, which that area is zoned for. Speaking of local initiatives, we know that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Different communities have different needs. So toward that end, I'm working on some legislation to create a new 10-year federal block grant program to provide some long-term flexible assistance to distressed local labor markets, so that communities can have their own localized policies to create quality jobs for local residents. So I guess I share that with you to put a period on the end of the sentence. There's plenty that the federal government has done, but there's plenty more that the federal government needs to do to ensure that we recover this economy. Now, having said that, honestly, I'm really psyched about the economic future in Kitsap County because we have so much to offer. We have school districts that are offering cutting edge options in career-connected learning. In fact, I spoke with the leadership of the Central Kitsap School District just yesterday and was really excited about what they're doing. We have Olympic College, which has become ground zero for building that productive workforce that will power our economic growth and recovery. They have A+ partnerships with Washington State University and with Western and others, and it's making a big difference. You know, we're so lucky to have the Navy as a part of our community and an important employer here in Kitsap County. You know, Keyport is doing cutting edge undersea research. Bangor is the sole Trident submarine base for the Pacific Fleet. And the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard is not just our county's largest employer. It is doing vitally important work, even in the midst of a global pandemic. We anticipate literally billions of dollars in military construction funding at Puget in the years ahead as part of the Navy's Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program. And as someone who sits on the Defense Appropriations Committee, it is an absolute priority of mine to ensure that our entire region benefits from that investment and that that investment happens. There are other great ingredients in our mix. We have a new VA clinic in Silverdale, an amazing new St. Michael Medical Center. We have tribal partners contributing to our economic vitality and to our environmental future. We have an economic development ecosystem from ports to PUDs to water districts. We have county and municipal leaders and this incredible economic development alliance and its great team. That is an A team that we've got on the field working to grow jobs in this community. And we have so many cool employers, from Safe Boats to Sound West, from Rice Fergus Miller, which designs amazing workspaces, to Watson Furniture, which can furnish them. We have outstanding financial institutions. We have Microsoft in Kitsap County now. I could literally talk about dozens and dozens more employers, many of whom are on this line. And I can say that in closing, just simply put, thank you. Thank you to every employer on this line. Thank you for doing business here. Thank you for employing people here. Thank you for being resilient during this tough time. Second, I share that with you in the hopes that you'll continue to be a cheerleader and evangelist for Kitsap County as a place in which to do business. The number one source of information for employers making location decisions is existing employers in that market. You are our best reference account. So keep supporting KEDA and keep telling the Kitsap story. And finally, quite simply, I just want to invite my partnership. I see my job as supporting the great work happening in Kitsap County, investing in infrastructure and education, fulfilling our trust obligations to our tribes, supporting our Navy, ensuring a business climate where businesses like all of yours can prosper. If you have an issue with any federal agency, the Navy, the IRS, the Small Business Administration, you name it, reach out to me, reach out to our office. And if you want to come visit, want me to come visit your company virtually or otherwise, just invite me. And if there's ever anything I can do to lend a hand, just count me on Team Kitsap. So thanks again for having me. And again, thank you for doing business in our community.
Looks like either you've wowed them and they don't have a lot of questions, or they're just being shy. Holly Hill from Western did post a comment that they are also proud to be part of the Kitsap community, partnering with OC with more higher ed degrees. And I don't see any other questions.
We love Western. Keep it coming, Western.
Yeah, and then of course we also have the partnership with WSU. Okay, Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you because Derek obviously answered every question anyone had with all his comments.
Well, we might want to note a couple things. One is we've got Trevor Ross saying, hey, what about OC? OC is remarkable. And one of the most interesting things about OC is like 85% of people with OC degrees stay in Kitsap. It's very rare and very unique in the world of community colleges. We value our relationship with OC and Western. And for the record, Congressman Kilmer's joke count was 5 in 4 minutes. And I thought they were great, Congressman. We don't want to give Hart and James too much opportunity to run with those jokes, but you never know, they may come back at it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you, Congressman, very much for your time. I'm going to press the share screen button and hope that good things happen. It's okay. Yeah, it's open. Enable editing. I know it's this is the guy. Can somebody tell me, besides seeing my remarkably scary screen, do we see a cloud?
Yes.
All right. So why is there a cloud? You know, there's a silver lining, and somebody earlier today said, what are these good things we're seeing for Kitsap? So we're going to talk about the silver lining, and then we're going to talk about the cloud. And so the silver lining is this, and the congressman just brought it up. There is enough vaccine on order that the forecast is that most Americans will be able to be vaccinated by the end of summer. That's exciting. It means a lot. And, you know, there is an intersection between the public health crisis and the economic crisis. And as Lynette Ladenburg said earlier today, please get your shot if you can. It's science, and it's what enables us to get through this and to move on with more of what a normal life is. What are these good things in Kitsap County? It's that we're seeing an influx and growth, and the growth is coming to our community, or it is already here. This includes large developments in Poulsbo. It includes, if you look at USA Today's roundup of pandemic news from the last 50 states, a discussion of Bremerton's housing in December. It includes that where I live in Port Orchard, in the month of January, according to the mayor, Rob Gutansu, more than 300 residential permit applications were applied for. 300 was the number that they experienced in 2020. So in 2021, in January, they had more applications than they did the prior year. So we're seeing residential growth, but we're also seeing large investments in our community. This includes the opening of St. Michael Medical Center, a $500 million medical institution here in Silverdale. This includes the continued remarkable economic asset that is Naval Base Kitsap. And we can never be too appreciative of this. We can never be too appreciative of an institution and an economic asset that generates 33,000 direct jobs, thousands more in indirect jobs and contracting opportunities, and adds billions to the economy of Puget Sound every single year. It's remarkable. So some of the work KEDA is going to do in the future is going to involve the defense industry and making sure that we're maximizing economic opportunity coming out of the defense industry. But there's a cloud, and we're not out of this yet. And it is going to be months before we see things return to something like normal. And I think back to what Keith Grellner said, and when he was evaluating the history of the pandemic and those spikes are when we want to return to normal life. But when we do, we create more of a pandemic issue. The cloud is still here. This is an inequitable situation, and our economy has long been structured this way. And middle wage earners, it's not just low wage earners, but middle wage earners and low wage earners are getting hammered. Specific industries are getting hammered. And non-white demographic groups are feeling the economic pain of this far more than the majority. So what can we do about it? What are we going to do about it? Our call to this community is to remain together, to know that KEDA is going to be on the front lines of the economic crisis. If we're given the opportunity to run additional grant programs, we will. We'll be very focused on business retention and expansion opportunities. Some of what we do is evaluate sites for existing businesses here in Kitsap. Some of what we do is conduct market research for businesses here in Kitsap. We'll be doing it in every single part of this county moving forward. And part of our goal is to really bring this community together digitally. We wish we could be in Suquamish too, and we will be as soon as we possibly can. I can't wait to get to meet you folks in person. Folks I haven't. Here's how you can get involved. Shop, Eat, Spend Kitsap. We've got a Facebook group. It's supported by our local chambers of commerce. This is going to be our buy local campaign that'll last throughout the year. We'll be increasing our connectivity to it as we go through the year. You know, please, and if somebody, Kathy or Teresa, if you could put in the chat the link to the Shop, Eat, Spend Kitsap group, we'd appreciate it. Join our Facebook group. Awesome things popping on there constantly every day. A dozen plus things on how you can support your community locally. The first Thursday of every month, we get together and we talk about the latest thought leadership and things you need to know in response to the economy and this economic crisis. On March 4th, our next event, we'll be joined by Jamie Forsyth from the Small Business Development Center. And we're going to be talking about PPP loans, the shuttered operators venue grant, and anything that's the latest in terms of grant opportunities for our community. I've got 1 minute, I'm going to pull it off. Our annual meeting is March 25th. I should point out Bob Hunter from Kitsap Public Utilities District is going to do a deep dive into the matter of broadband and Kitsap and what we can do to support them as they seek to expand broadband in Kitsap. It matters. Moving on. By the way, that's free. Just follow us and we'll get you the registration link. And of course, you can join KEDA. Investments in KEDA start at $500. We, of course, have some significantly higher amounts of investment from some of our foundational funders and our legacy funders, our partners. We really appreciate that. My favorite part, thanks to everybody. And if the participants could put in the chat, great job, Teresa, we'd really appreciate it. Teresa Mangrum is our marketing and events coordinator. We've all worked on this project, but Teresa has worked constantly, relentlessly, and she's done a world-class job. Thank you, Teresa. Get in touch with us at KEDA however you can. I'm supposed to point out too, we'll have all these materials on our website, right where the circle is, before we head into the weekend. So by the close of business on Friday, we'll get this stuff up there. Again, thank Teresa Mangrum. Thank you for attending this. Thanks to Kitsap Credit Union for being our premier event sponsor. Thanks to our digital media partners, Golden Shovel, who's been in the background running technology, and to Mountain and Maker Films for that great break film that thanked all of our investors. We appreciate that. We appreciate all our investors and board members too. Reach out, get in touch, join KEDA, one Kitsap, stick together. Thank you very much. We've got this. Bye-bye.